A very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. On today's show, a devastating report reveals the failings of those treating paranoid schizophrenic Nottingham killer Valdo Calocane.
Plus, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, warns Tehran not to attack Israel in a direct phone call with the Iranian president.
Plenty to bring you. It's Tuesday, the 13th of August. Victims' families say the doctors and police who let Nottingham killer Valdo Calocane walk the streets have blood on their hands. We'll speak to the father of Grace O'Malley Kumar in the next few minutes, stabbed to death along with fellow student Barnaby Webber and caretaker Ian Coates.
It's exactly a week since Ukrainian forces launched a shock cross-border attack into Russia. They're now saying to claim more than 600 square miles of Russian territory.
No, I'm not going this out! I'm not going this out! No! Get off! Get off me now!
We're with the police as they train to use force safely. And a treat for stargazers after the most spectacular meteor shower of the year.
And I'm here with some of Team GB's Olympic heroes back home and now inspiring the next generation of athletic stars.
Very good morning to you. Gareth Barlow with you on Sky Breakfast. A new report has revealed that doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill someone 3 years before he went on the rampage in Nottingham. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned but then discharged by mental health workers before he stabbed 3 people to death last year. And the families of his victims say the clinicians involved in treating him have blood on their hands. Well, the report from the Care Quality Commission revealed a series of blunders while Valdo Calocane was a patient of Nottingham Healthcare. There was an inconsistent approach to assessing the risk that he posed to himself and also to others. Poor planning and engagement with his family meant warnings weren't acted on. And the decision to discharge him back into the community did not adequately consider the risk that he would relapse. Our Midlands correspondent, Becky Cottrell, has this report.
Roaming the streets in the early hours, armed with a knife, Valdo Calocane stabbed 3 strangers to death. He said voices in his head told him to do it. His victims were Ian Coates, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar. Their families have been demanding answers. Now a review by health inspectors has found there were serious errors in Calocane's care.
There was an issue around poor care planning and engagement. Valdo Calocane's family contacted the trust to raise concerns on a number of occasions, but the information they provided was not consistently acted on.
Some of these failings had already been laid bare by Calocane's brother in a letter to the victims' families. We can exclusively reveal what it said. We have seen firsthand just how broken the mental health care system is and can say without hesitation that this tragedy was completely avoidable if the system worked properly. My mother regularly expressed concerns to the relevant services about Valdo's mental deterioration, but these were constantly played down because he looked okay. Of course, we knew this not to be true, as he would constantly speak of his paranoid delusions to us. Ian Coates was a grandfather and much-loved school caretaker.
How did it make you feel reading that letter?
Angry. Basically washing his hands of responsibility. Him and his mother, they did what they could, but it was all down to the NHS. It was down to the mental health for not doing what they needed to do. But they knew he was unwell and they didn't do enough to help him.
The Chief Executive of Nottinghamshire Healthcare says he has committed to do everything within his power to prevent such a tragedy reoccurring. But it should never have happened in the first place. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham.
Well, we'll speak to the father of Grace O'Malley Kumar about that report in the next few minutes here on Sky News. In the meantime, let's turn our attention to Ukraine, which claims to hold 600 square miles of Russian territory after its cross-border offensive. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes is in Lviv in western Ukraine this morning for us. Deborah, what can you tell us?
Well, the latest is that the Russian Defence Ministry saying they shot down 12 Ukrainian drones launched into the Kursk region. But this is a disaster for Vladimir Putin. It's a week now since Ukrainian forces launched their offensive into Kursk from the Sumy region in northeastern Ukraine. Here's my latest report. Ukraine's new and expanding war zone inside Russia. This town, close to the border in Kursk region, apparently now partly under Ukrainian control. More and more footage is emerging of a shock advance that's turned Russia's war in Ukraine on its head in just 7 days. These images have been verified by Sky News. With his troops on the march, Volodymyr Zelensky lifted the veil on an operation that's been carried out in top secret. His military chief invited to share an update by video link.
Currently, we have control over approximately 1,000 square kilometers of Russian Federation territory. Our troops are carrying out their assigned tasks. The fighting is taking place across virtually the entire front. The situation remains under our control.
The president then had a message for Vladimir Putin.
Russia must be forced into peace if Putin wants to continue waging war so badly.
It's an extraordinary turnaround, captured by the Russian Defence Ministry's own footage. Troops forced to take aim on their soil instead of targeting Ukraine's. Unlike his Ukrainian counterpart, the Russian president was said by analysts to look rattled as he held a security meeting.
Apparently, the enemy is trying to improve its negotiating positions in the future. What kind of negotiations can we even talk about with people who indiscriminately attack civilians and civilian infrastructure or try to create threats to nuclear energy facilities? What can you talk to them about?
Unsurprisingly, the Kremlin's perspective won't be shared in Ukraine, which has endured 2.5 years of Russia's full-scale war. With reports of Ukrainian troops attacking the region of Belgorod as well, a growing number of Russian civilians are being evacuated. President Putin says the assault is making more of his people want to fight Ukraine, but might it also prompt questions about why he attacked his neighbour in the first place?
Deborah, there has been constant pressure across that semicircular arc of the front in Ukraine itself, the Russians slowly making progress. There was kind of an assumption that in many respects Ukraine would struggle to hold the line. It's now entered Russia itself, kind of flipping this whole situation on its head. But in reality, how long can it stand to stay on Russian soil?
Well, I imagine that there was probably quite a bit of surprise for the Ukrainians that they've been able to push so far so quickly. Of course, they would have had intelligence. They could see the lack of Russian defences along that border region, but they would have anticipated a much stronger Russian response much faster, but that didn't happen. I was speaking to a source yesterday who gave a sense of the aims of this mission. One of them, this source said, was to create basically a buffer zone, a grey zone, not inside Ukrainian territory, but inside Russian territory, to help better protect the communities, the people who live in Sumy region, for example, and Kharkiv region, and have been under heavy bombardment from Russian forces on the other side of the border. Another aim is to have leverage, greater leverage over Vladimir Putin, to hold some territory that could maybe then be negotiated for Russian-held territory in Ukraine. There's clearly, and this is something that Volodymyr Zelensky said yesterday, there's clearly a desire to increase what he calls the exchange fund of prisoners, detainees, Ukrainian soldiers and others held in Russia being swapped for the Russian soldiers that it seems Ukraine has managed to capture so far in this offensive. And then another goal is really to show to the Russian people that the war is much closer than they think. They've had 2.5 years of Russia's full-scale invasion, largely contained within Ukraine. Yes, the Ukrainians have increasingly been launching drone and missile strikes, including deep into Russia, but this is the first time that they have tried a concerted land offensive, and they're not just going in and coming out, they're going in, they're taking land, and they clearly plan to stay there if they can.
Deborah Haynes in Lviv for us this morning. Thank you so much. Let's turn our attention to Greece because a major forest fire has left one person dead and forced people to evacuate from the northern suburbs of Athens. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins joins us now. This fire has moved from being on the outskirts 20 or so miles away to much, much closer. What's the latest?
Yes, that's exactly right. If you look at where I am now, this is a house which was burnt yesterday afternoon, and we're about 25 minutes drive from the centre of Athens city. You can see it's been absolutely decimated by the heat here, and the power of that fire coming through has buckled the ceiling. It's even burnt the fireplace. The metal in the windows has been buckled. The ceiling has fallen down. Chairs have melted. It just shows you how powerful these wildfires are. And I spoke to the owner of this house, Sakis. He's a 70-year-old. He said he was in there around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They were told by the fire brigade, you need to get out. He basically managed to get his dog and run for it. He didn't manage to save anything else. He said he didn't even manage to taste the grapes that he'd been growing here before the fire came through. And it's in this area where it's sadly been confirmed that someone has died in the fire. Unconfirmed reports in local media that it's a local lady who died, but it's in a building behind us which was also caught up in the same blaze. And this started on Sunday for many parts in this area. The fire then spread down to these areas really very close to the edge of Athens. And this has been compounded because Greece has had the warmest winter on record, followed by the warmest June and July. So the ground here is so dry, and when you drop a spark, everything just goes up. And the problem that the firefighters were facing over the last 24 hours or so was that the winds were very strong. These gale force winds were fanning the flames. Now, the good news overnight is that those winds have died down a little bit, but the situation is still really bleak. The fire here has been put out, but there are other pockets. So rather than one big front now, they're fighting little pockets all over. But this is now an annual story that happens in Greece. I was here last year in Rhodes, and I feel like Greeks now are just waiting to see who's going to be affected year on year. This is them living through a changing climate and the devastating impact of that.
Siobhan Robbins in Athens for us. Thank you for the update. Let's take a look at some of the morning's other headlines for you now. A man has been charged with attempted murder and possession of a bladed article following the stabbing of an 11-year-old girl in London's Leicester Square. Owen Pintaru will appear in court later this morning. It was initially believed the girl's mother was also hurt, but blood from her daughter's injuries had been mistaken for her own. The rate of unemployment in the UK fell to 4.2% in the 3 months to June. That's down by 0.2% on the previous 3 months. The Office for National Statistics say that even though the rate of unemployment is on the decline, the total number out of work remains above that of pre-pandemic levels. Health officials are calling on pregnant women to accept a new NHS vaccine to lower the chances of children contracting respiratory viruses. The UK Health Security Agency say around 90% of children are affected in the first 2 years of their lives. Scientists say there could be water below the surface on Mars, enough to have once covered the planet. Using data from NASA's InSight lander, scientists say the volume of water could have filled ancient Martian oceans. But the reservoir isn't easy to access. It's located in rocks up to 20 kilometres below the planet's surface. Well, let's stick with space, because while many peeled their eyes for the Perseid meteor shower last night, some stargazers were lucky enough to spot this display as well. This was the night sky in Yorkshire, where vibrant purple and green northern lights dazzled while the meteor shower rained down at just the same time. Beautiful images, plenty more of them actually on the Sky News website. In the meantime, police forces are hoping that a new training programme can help officers to use force safely and cut the number of violent incidents. Rachel Venables was invited along to join the police on the course. Her report does contain some distressing images.
This gentleman has been arrested for a fray.
It only takes a split second for their job to turn physical. This is a training exercise developed for police in England and Wales after concerns about attacks on officers and the number of people who've been hurt, even killed in custody. It's been developed by the College of Policing as an annual 2-day refresher course for serving officers. They practice with restraints and discuss the warning signs of asphyxiation.
It depends on the individual, the size of them, if they're under the influence of drugs or any sort of mental health issues. So then you've got to tailor your tactics, how you're going to deal with that individual in the best way possible to make them feel safe and your colleagues feel safe.
The college says a pilot scheme in Avon and Somerset produced significant results. They estimate the training led to 1,200 fewer use of force incidents over 12 months. Before it, they say an average officer used force in the job 6 times a year. That has now dropped to an average of 5 times. With smartphones constantly recording their interactions, the police are increasingly under pressure and criticism for their use of force. And this incident at Manchester Airport sparked huge protests a few weeks ago. The chair of the College of Policing says bosses need to be more proactive in releasing body cam footage after controversial arrests or viral incidents.
Some of the circumstances that amount to that is where there's a huge public and press interest, particularly where the release of the body-worn footage may actually help prevent serious violence or serious disorder.
This summer's riots have highlighted more than ever the threats police face from members of the public, the very people they've sworn to protect.
Get off me!
It's hoped this new training will make that difficult job a little easier. Rachel Venables, Sky News in Hendon.
Just gone 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. Let's get more on our main story today. A new report released that says that doctors had warned that the Nottingham attacker Valdo Calocane could have killed someone 3 years before he went on a rampage last June. Well, let's join now Grace O'Malley Kumar's mother and father, Dr. Sanjoy Kumar, and his wife, Dr. Sinead. Thank you both so much for your time this morning. Lots of things to get through with you both, but first of all, how are you both?
Pretty devastated after reading all the reports and seeing the Panorama programme yesterday, I must say.
So the Panorama programme was on the BBC, the report from the CQC. Let's just, with regards to the Panorama programme, what was your thoughts and feelings after that? That was half an hour last night, looking at the situation with regards to Valdo and his family.
Well, Gareth, Sinead and I have a lot of respect for investigative journalists. They have uncovered so much in our case, far more than the police have at times. The thing that, disappointed us really was the scope of the programme and some very important points. The programme started out by telling us about Valdo Calocane's background. It stated the first line was that his father was a builder. But what Navtej Johal failed to tell the whole country, the whole nation, is that Valdo Calocane's mother is a registered nurse, still registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Council. When there was a notion that they didn't know about his diagnosis in 2020, find that very hard, because in 2020 the symptoms were discussed with them, and they are all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. On top of that, really, I think Navtej should have explored when a young lady jumped out of a first floor window, fractured her spine, injured herself to that extent. Why did the police not charge Valdo Calocane? There was an insinuation that people didn't want to press charges. But if an injury as serious as a fractured spine is not in the public interest for the police to charge, then what is? So some very tough questions that could have been asked by Panorama's team for the public interest were not asked. Things about toxicology, which is something that we have also asked, something about drug taking by Calocane, that was not explored amongst his peers, his friends, people he met within 24 hours of the killings. Panorama is a program with teeth normally, and yesterday we found it sensationalistic, and it didn't really explore some of the hard questions that we had been asking for.
To what degree did the programme, did the reporter, did the BBC interact with you before its broadcast, and was there any opportunity to contribute to it?
No, the Panorama did not contact us. They notified us about the programme's planning to air, but we were never asked for any comment, input or any questions whatsoever. We had no contribution or a chance to contribute. On the contrary, we weren't engaged at all.
And in fact, I believe if they had, I think the programme would have been far more useful, Gareth, for the public.
So you effectively had a letter or an email saying this is what we plan to do and this is how we're going to do it?
And that was pretty much the end of it.
We had an email notifying us that it was going to go to air, and it was regarding and basically looking at NHS, and that some of the people who had never been interviewed before were going to be interviewed, including the family.
Now, obviously, the Panorama documentary came out last night. Today, reading the CQC report into the situation with regards to the care and failings of care. What are your thoughts and views on what you've been reading?
Gareth, first and foremost, I've got to say, if I was Lord Justice Turner today, who conducted our hearing, because of course we were denied a trial, the whole idea of drug-resistant schizophrenia was bandied about, and much was done about it, and that actually directed the course of our trial. The CQC confirmed emphatically that there was no such thing. There was no such thing as drug-resistant schizophrenia. The point was that the patient resisted taking his medication, and his condition waxed and waned. When someone does that, they're fully culpable. The example that I have made is if that someone doesn't take their blood pressure medication, they'll expect a heart attack. They expect things to happen. In the same way, Calocane was not drug-resistant. He simply did not take his drugs. The risk assessments in his case were really poor by treating consultants, and he was sectioned 4 times. There were 4 opportunities to change his medication, change it to depot medication, which is injectable, which means that the patient complies. There were no community treatment orders put in place so that he would take his medication in the community. We had a simple case of a culpable person who just did not take his medication. All of this is devastating to read. It was so basic. The errors were not technical. They were basic errors and repeated 4 times over. There were so many chances to change the course of Calocane, but none of those opportunities were taken by any of the doctors. And lastly, the doctor who actually discharged him. That was the most irresponsible thing to do, knowing that a doctor initially, the one thing we did not know is that a doctor had put in the notes that he had the potential to murder someone. Even meeting the trust, Ifti Majid, who's the chief executive, did not discuss that with us. They weren't transparent and actually they did not tell us that this person had the potential for murder. Even now, things are being kept from us.
The CQC report clearly also says that basically there was no doubt that Valdo Calocane was going to relapse given his non-compliance with his medication and lack of engagement. And ultimately, statistics show that if there's a decent or at least even a basic standard of delivery of care, homicide does not occur.
The hope with reports like these, as they bring about change, that they bring about improvement, that things through such terrible circumstances do eventually get better. How hopeful are you that change will be brought about?
Well, Gareth, Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health, has promised us that he's going to slow down the modifications to the Mental Health Act. He has promised that we will be able to work with people who are working with the law. A change is needed. We need to step back a little bit and we need to see what is safe for the public. We have lost the absolute love of our life, our lovely, beautiful and brave daughter, Gracie. And at the end of the day, what we want to see is that the public are safe. I think the nation, as you know now, are crying out for safety from these crimes. You reported just before our item a stabbing. I really wonder if that was also related to mental health. At the end of the day, we want to get the Mental Health Act right. It's not about depriving people of their liberty. It's about just getting it right. It's about holding clinicians responsible who put people like that out on our streets. Any psychiatrist who puts out a dangerous person on our streets has to be held responsible for putting that patient out if he has not done a comprehensive risk assessment, which was another flaw that the CQC actually brought out in our case, that risk assessments were not done correctly, were not done fully. And these must be done under the law when the Mental Health Act is fully modified and completed. And we really hope to be working collaboratively with West Streeting, who certainly has the will and the intention to get this right.
You mentioned there the Health Secretary. You've learned that a public inquiry will be forthcoming. What more insight have you been given with regards to that?
Well, at the moment, we would like the terms of reference to cover a wide spectrum of all of the failings, because there were so many failings. There were failings not just by the Mental Health Trust. There were failings by Nottinghamshire Police. There were immense failings by Leicestershire Police. There were failings within the council. There are failings by so many organisations and then individuals. All of this needs to be brought together under a terms of reference that covers a public inquiry so that things get better for everyone. Every victim today in England who has suffered the way we have, we want justice for them. We want the law changed for them. We fight in their name. We really want to change things for the better so that no other family ever fears for their child getting on a school bus, going to school, going to college, and being away from their family.
You talked there about change. Sinead, you've started the Grace O'Malley Kumar Foundation. Talk to us about that and what you're aiming to achieve.
Well, the Grace O'Malley Kumar Foundation was initially set up by Grace's brother James, her younger brother and best friend. It's a small way that we can try and keep Grace's legacy alive. Grace was an incredibly empathic, kind young lady. She was too good to be true. She was a sporty girl. She was a very bright girl. She was studying medicine and was going to become a doctor. But apart from that, she also was incredibly loyal to her friends, and she always called out bullying or people who would isolate or socially engineer friendships. So basically, it's going to hopefully be used for initiatives to encourage friendships and to encourage perhaps what we've terminized as grace groups within schools, universities and institutions to encourage empathy, but also it will go to hopefully grassroots sport to support sports, because sport was a great part of Grace's life. She was an England hockey player, and we'll be hoping to support initiatives like that.
Really appreciate you both making time for us today. Dr. Sinead O'Malley Kumar, Dr. Sanjoy Kumar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us, Gareth.
Good morning.
We did hear there during some of that conversation some criticism of the BBC's Panorama programme. Well, a BBC spokesperson has said, I quote, "We have the deepest sympathy for the families, and the Panorama team has been extremely mindful of the sensitivities in handling this programme. They've been in contact with the bereaved families to tell them about the programme and provide an outline of its editorial focus." The BBC statement went on to say the investigation asks whether there were systemic failings and missed opportunities in Valdo Calocane's interactions with mental health services in the 3 years leading up to the terrible events in Nottingham last year. We'll have more on this through the course of the programme. You're watching Sky News.
conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, as the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, urges calm in the Middle East, we'll be speaking to the former Middle East Minister, Alistair Burt. But before that, let me remind you of our top stories this morning. A new report has revealed that doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill someone 3 years before he went on the rampage in Nottingham. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned, but then discharged by mental health workers before he stabbed 3 people to death last year. The parents of one of his victims, Grace Amalikuma, have told this programme they want a public inquiry to examine the failings of all those involved, including the police. Ukrainian commanders claim they now hold 1,000 square kilometres, 600 square miles of territory inside Russia, following the continued incursion into border regions. But Russia has warned President Zelensky is taking, I quote, insane steps that risk an escalation of the war far beyond Ukraine. Hundreds of firefighters are still battling major wildfires near Athens. The outbreak started on Sunday near Lake Marathon, about 20 miles north of the Greek capital, before reaching the city's suburbs. And a much-anticipated interview between Donald Trump and Elon Musk was marred by technical difficulties, which the tech billionaire blamed on a cyber attack. The former president promised the largest deportation in US history during the broadcast on X. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has warned Tehran not to attack Israel in a direct call with the Iranian president. There are growing fears that Iran could strike Israel following the killing of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last month. Well, to discuss this further, we're joined by former Middle East Minister Alistair Burt, who joins us this morning. Thank you so much for doing so. There's fears, continued fears of an Iranian retaliation, and they're not unfounded. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said that it should happen, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is kind of poised to do something. The question is what and when? What insight can you share with us? What should the world be looking out for?
Well, the region remains in a very tense situation. On the one hand, you have huge diplomatic efforts going on, not just in relation to descaling the threat of further escalation, but a new initiative in relation to trying to ensure a ceasefire in Gaza and progress there, joint initiative by the United States, Egypt and Qatar. That is going on the one hand, with the chance of negotiations starting again. And on the other, these threats in relation to retaliation for 2 assassinations, one in Lebanon and one in Tehran. The region seems to work on a basis of no action going unpunished or no action without retaliation. And all that does is lead to a continuing increase in tension rather than getting down to the negotiations and resolution that's really needed. So that's where we are this morning, that continuing threat, but huge efforts being made to de-escalate it.
Part of that effort is Sir Keir Starmer speaking with the Iranian president. What do you make of the fact that those diplomatic channels are at least open?
Really important. I mean, I remember a series of visits that I made to Tehran, and the United Kingdom has always kept channels open with Tehran since 2015. It's necessary in dealing with a state with which you don't always agree. There's no reason to excuse or justify the actions of the other. But if a channel is broken down, then you've got to work out how you rekindle it again and what you do next. I think it was a good call by Keir Starmer to speak to President Pezeshkian yesterday. He's still a very new president. Of course, Iran works on the basis of authority coming from the supreme leader rather than the president. But Iran is a state under pressure as well. It has internal pressures. So do many of the states in the region. And the fact that the Prime Minister was able to speak directly to him, talk about the importance of descaling tension and trying to find other ways of resolving the disputes between Iran and its neighbours and the other pressures in the region. I've always worked on the basis, if you're not going to fight, then you might as well talk. So I was pleased to see the call. I'm sure it was wide-ranging and covered other factors as well as the war in Gaza and the possibility of retaliation for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
Just because somebody spends half an hour listening doesn't necessarily mean that they will listen. To what degree can the UK really apply political pressure, do you think? You know, I think of the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, for example. That took years to resolve. And this, in many respects, is a much, much, much larger challenge. We've not seen the international community have success so far in the Middle East in recent months. Will the UK?
It's a fair question. I don't think anyone in the UK works on the basis that the UK alone is going to be a decisive player in reaching a settlement here. But it is a voice, and it's an important voice. And the United Kingdom acts in concert. Only this week, the UK, France and Germany issued a further plea to all parties to avoid retaliation in relation to the recent assassination strikes. And it is important that the United Kingdom is seen as a part of a huge number of nations who are urging an end to this conflict. So to that extent, the United Kingdom's engagement is important. We still have military assets in the region, and we're part of a force designed to deter. But overall, your question is entirely pertinent. How do the diplomats try to get an end to what is happening between Israel and Hamas in Gaza? That can only come through increased diplomacy. But the longer it goes on, the pressures are there very much inside Israel to try and get an answer. Many thousands are demonstrating, urging Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire arrangement and the return of hostages, which is the priority of the Israeli people. And the longer the pressure goes on, the more likely it is that sooner or later there will be the moves that are needed to make an agreement. And that's what's needed now. And the United Kingdom plays an important diplomatic part in that.
We're seeing the United States sending military assets, guided missile, submarine, a carrier strike group to the region too. Kind of going back to your point of nothing goes unpunished in the region, is there a potential that the West ratcheting up their response also then kind of just puts everything even more on edge than it already is? How do you calibrate that? And to what degree does the UK calibrate its response militarily?
Remembering recently the attack that was launched by Iran against the state of Israel, the very sizable missile attack that was launched in April, that was met by a concerted response from a number of nations, including Arab nations, making it clear that Israel's existence was not to be threatened. by those in the region who sought to attack it. And that military buildup was an important part of that, to make sure that Israel was defended from such an attack. And the fact that the United States is there again will put in the minds of Iran and others who wanted to attack Israel directly that there would be a response and there would be a defense to that. But as you and I have both been discussing, the tit for tat in relation to attacks and reprisals ultimately gets us nowhere if we're not getting to the root cause of the issue between states in the region. Some time ago, a couple of years ago, there were efforts being made by those in the region to find a different Middle East, away from conflict, based more on economic relationships and new diplomacy, particularly between some Arab states and Iran. Now, that's the course that should be followed. The military calibration is there to deter and not to increase, and that's what the United States and others, including the United Kingdom, are doing, to try and make sure there is not a devastating attack on Israel, which would create a war. And all the signs are that Iran knows that extremely well. That's why there's not yet been an attack from Iran or its allies. And if there is a response to the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, it may be calibrated not to be a direct attack on civilians, which would almost certainly spark an enormous response from Israel, but more calibrated. But ultimately, the calibrations of tit for tat, none of these will actually end the matter. That will only end through the diplomacy that's being offered in relation to Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and the wider resolution and diplomatic settlement that is necessary for all the states in the region to live in a different way than this continuing conflict. And those efforts must continue, and I expect the United Kingdom will play a strong part in that.
Alistair Burt, former Conservative MP, former Middle East Minister, really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, Darren's here just for a few thoughts on that. The idea, really, of the importance of the UK being part of that chorus of voices to try and bring about change as and when that change happens.
Yeah, indeed. And we have
also calm.
Yeah, we have seen a concerted effort, it must be said, by the UK over the last 24 hours or so. As Alistair Burt was alluding to there yesterday, we saw a joint statement with France and Germany, the E3 as it's called, to try and dissuade Iran from attacking Israel. And then last night, that phone call between the Prime Minister and the Iranian President. The first time, actually, a British Prime Minister has spoken to an Iranian President in a number of years. Boris Johnson was the last to do so. Keir Starmer saying there would be a serious risk of miscalculation, and now is the time for calm and careful consideration, that he was deeply concerned by the situation in the region and called on all parties to de-escalate and avoid further regional confrontation. So there are clearly all these diplomatic efforts. Now, as you've rightly pointed out, is anyone actually going to listen to what the UK has to say, or indeed the European powers in all of this? I think behind the scenes there is real concern that we are looking at the potential of at least an attack that could lead to a wider conflict. And we know, according to the I newspaper this morning, there were like 1,000 British military personnel on standby to evacuate British nationals in different parts of the Middle East if things do escalate. And this also comes at the same time, as I said, those diplomatic efforts are continuing, and at the same time, the airlines are effectively now avoiding flying to the Middle East. So real concern about escalation. This attempt at diplomacy, will it work? I think they're trying all they can. Behind the scenes, though, they're very, very concerned about all of this.
We'll follow the developments closely as and when they do happen. Darren, for a moment, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, a breakthrough potentially for diabetics. Scientists look for funding to develop a new kind of insulin.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world: Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Just gone quarter to 8 on a Tuesday morning. Those with type 1 diabetics could have their lives transformed as researchers attempt to develop a new kind of insulin. Well, to discuss this, we're going to bring in now Rachel Connor. Talk to me, if you will, Rachel, about this new kind of insulin. It rolls off the tongue, but it's far more complex than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this new funding, we are trying to develop new forms of insulin which respond in the body much more like the insulin that those of us who don't live with type 1 diabetes produce on our own. Because at the moment, managing type 1 diabetes is phenomenally complex because the insulins that we have simply aren't good enough and they don't work the way that insulin does in the body if it's produced by the pancreas. So we're trying to change that by bringing forward new insulins which can respond in real time to what's happening in the body.
So we have insulin produced by the pancreas in someone that doesn't have type 1 diabetes, then people that potentially maybe have an insulin pump, for example, that monitors their blood sugar levels and then pumps insulin in response to that. This goes a step further. So the insulin is in the body and is smart.
Yes, absolutely. So with this funding, we are trying to develop forms of insulin which will do the work of the technology for it, or even allow people with type 1 diabetes to take off their tech and not worry about glucose monitoring or pumping in insulin, because although technology has advanced hugely and can really support people with type 1 diabetes, there is still a lag phase. When insulin goes in, whether it's through an injection or a pump, it takes a while to get working. So that means the system cannot be as responsive as we would want it to be. So with new, faster-acting, more responsive forms of insulin, not only would the tech get better, but potentially we could take the tech off entirely.
I'm thinking potentially, overnight, you're asleep. It's hard to monitor whether you're about to have a hypo and your blood sugar's about to fall. And there's kind of elements there that it will do the heavy lifting whilst people are not awake.
Absolutely. Managing type 1 diabetes is an absolutely relentless condition. And as you say, when you're asleep, you can't be aware of what's happening in your body. But there are so many factors which change how your body uses glucose and how it needs insulin, that just having some capability for that to be responded to without you having to think about it, without you having to act on it, could be transformational for people with type 1 diabetes.
So the big question that many people, I'm sure, listening this morning will be going, well, when? When's it going to be, and will I be able to access it?
So the when question's always really hard. With these projects that we're launching today, they're still in the lab, so we've got a long way to go. But what this funding push will really allow us to do is accelerate things as fast as possible towards the clinic, where we can start trying it with people who live with type 1 diabetes and make sure it actually works and does make life better.
Fascinating stuff, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Rachel Connor, Director of Research Partnerships at JDRF. Perfect. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Now then, Team GB have returned from Paris, of course, already making a difference at youth clubs in London, looking to inspire the next generation of athletes as they do so, hopefully also inspiring Shaman Freeman-Powell, who's in Paddington for us. What's going on behind you?
Well, sadly, you've just missed me attempting to get a basketball in the hoop, but some of the other athletes have been much better than I have. As you said, they are down here at a youth club in Paddington trying to inspire the next generation, because as much as we praise them for being Olympic athletes, what's really important is that trickle-down effect, making sure that younger people know that it's possible to achieve that dream. I can now speak to someone that has just recently achieved an Olympic dream. First of all, welcome home. How are you feeling, Joe Clark? You've just won a silver medal at the Olympics for canoeing. How did it feel being back home?
Yeah, no, it's great to be back home, and you live in that Olympic bubble for them 2 weeks, and you're not quite sure how it's going down in the UK. Obviously, I had family and friends messaging and stuff, but to be here, you really get the vibe of what it's all about. If I was you, after what's been an incredible couple of weeks, you'd probably be exhausted and probably need a good week's worth of sleep. Why did you instead decide to come down here and inspire the youth? Well, like you say, I would love to have a sleep, but there's plenty of time for that afterwards. So to be here this morning and sharing the medal with this youth club and the children that are here today, and I mean the buzz we've got here today is fantastic, and that's what it's all about to me. I mean, whilst we're in that bubble, enjoyed that, but we're here now to inspire the next generation and inspire the nation.
And can I have a look at your medal? Can you hold it up for me? Can I touch it as well?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Oh, it's very heavy as well,
Yeah,
isn't
exactly.
it? That is cool. I'm going to place it gently. Did you ever believe that that would be possible when you were this age?
No. Well, I started canoeing when I was 11 years old, and it was very much just like a little passion project for me at the time. And of course, I dreamt about winning an Olympic medal, but dreaming and doing it are two different things. So, like, if somebody had come down to the canoe club with an Olympic medal at the time, I would have just been in awe of them. And I had a bit of that in 2004. I met Campbell Walsh, who had a silver, and I've got a photo of him, and he was like way taller than I am. I was a little dot, and yeah, that's the kind of like what really sparked my interest and really wanted me to go out there and try and win medals. So hopefully there might be somebody in here today that's had that same inspiration.
Absolutely. And finally, we talk about the importance of sports and young people engaging in sports and activities, but funding is also important, isn't it? What do you think about that, and what sort of need is currently there for funding in sports?
I mean, the National Lottery support, obviously myself and a lot of the Olympic athletes with funding, but they also, a lot of people don't know that they are funding these projects like this today. We've got a Changemaker programme happening, 100 athletes signed up from Team GB and trying to inspire the next generation. So to me it's super important because obviously it allows me to do what I do, but also then it's about giving back and making these things happen. So it kind of like keeps going around in a circle and hopefully keep these medals coming.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time and welcome home once again. As I say, this is all about inspiring the next generation of young athletes who in a few years' time may be at the Olympics themselves. There are over 100 athletes up and down the country this week doing the very same thing, trying to give back to their local communities.
Shaman Freeman-Powell, thank you, and we'll let you practice your basketball. We'll come back to you in a bit and see how it goes. Shaman there, playing basketball, and obviously lots of attention.
Would you be good at basketball?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would not. I would double dribble for sure. Lots of attention on LA. One person who won't be there is Tom Daly. Before we get to that, actually, because this is quite nice, there was a survey from YouGov that found 27% of Britons thought if they started training today, they would qualify for the Olympics in Los Angeles in 28.
I mean, I'm very disappointed the breakdancing is not going to be in the next Olympics because I think if I had 4 years, I think I could give a pretty good go at breakdancing. I would be in that 27%. Don't look at me like that. No. No, I said I need 4 years. I said I need 4 years. And,
well, we'll come back to it.
That's 4 minutes.
We'll make a date of it in 4 years' time. Well, 3% of Brits thought they would make the diving. One person who isn't going to be there is Tom Daly. He's announced his retirement after winning his 5th medal in the pool, making him the most decorated diver in history. Let's hear a listen to what he intends to do next.
You know, future for me, a lot more time with my kids, a lot more time knitting. I want to be able to kind of expand my Made with Love knitting world to hopefully bring my passion for knitting to more people, crochet, you know, just generally hand-making things and slowing down and trying to, you know, be a little bit more mindful with the way that we make things.
How does it feel?
So come on then, you're going to say now that you can knit and crochet better than Tom Daly.
I definitely not knit. No, I can't. But it is very cool, isn't it? It's become quite fashionable. Knitting's a bit of a zeitgeist thing these days. I mean, I've never given it a go myself. I can imagine it'd be very good. It does look pretty complicated. Have you ever tried it?
My grandma tried and failed to try and get me to do that. But just going back then, so you think you could do the breakdancing?
What have I started?
What do you think the top most responded sport to was?
Surely it must be athletics, running, no?
10-metre air rifle shooting was 15%
well, I assume a lot of people do that
could.
on, like, a kind of, you know, maybe the weekend or whatever. Just on Tom Daly, though, apparently he left his medal, do you read this, in Paris?
No.
He got the Eurostar, came back to London and realised he'd left his medal there, which seems quite extraordinary. I would have thought, you know, passport, phone, definitely going to bring my medal.
Which is how I pack for every holiday. But, you know, when he's got as many as that, he's got his golds, he's got his silvers and bronzes, he can afford to kind of leave them.
So if you had one sport for LA, one sport in 2028...
Not running, because I have the grace of a steam train. I think probably the rifle shooting, because I did do it a little bit when I was younger and kind of coming from a rural background.
There you go. You can watch breakdancing and rifle shooting in LA in 2028.
Mash-up
from Team Sky News.
Anyway, we're going to have plenty more on the day's stories throughout the course of the day. Here on Breakfast, stay with us. Thanks for watching. Very good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. On today's show, the family of one of the Nottingham attack victims tells this programme why they're demanding a public inquiry following a devastating report into the failings in the case of Valdo Calocane.
Plus, in politics, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has warned Tehran not to attack Israel in a direct call with the Iranian presidents.
More on both of those stories coming up Tuesday, the 13th of August. The victims' families say the doctors and police who let Nottingham killer Valdo Calocane walk the streets have blood on their hands. In the last hour, the parents of victim Grace O'Malley Kumar tell Sky News the report was devastating.
The point was that the patient resisted taking his medication and his condition waxed and waned. When someone does that, they're fully culpable.
It's exactly a week since Ukraine launched a shock cross-border attack into Russia, with its forces now claiming to control around 1,000 square kilometres of Russian territory.
Here in Athens, thousands have been ordered to evacuate as wildfires rage in the suburbs of the Greek capital.
No, I'm not going this out! I'm not going this out! No! Get off! Get off me now!
Also to come, we're with the police as they train to use force safely. Plus, a treat for stargazers after the most spectacular meteor shower of the year.
And I'm here with some of Team GB's Olympic heroes back home and now inspiring the next generation of athletic superstars.
A very good morning to you. A new report has revealed that doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill someone 3 years before he went on the rampage in Nottingham. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned but then discharged by mental health workers before he stabbed 3 people to death last year. And the families of his victims say the clinicians involved in treating him have blood on their hands. Well, the report from the Care Quality Commission revealed a series of blunders while Valdo Calocane was a patient of Nottingham Healthcare. There was an inconsistent approach to assessing the risk that he posed to himself and others. Poor planning and engagement with his family meant warnings weren't acted on, and the decision to discharge him back into the community did not adequately consider the risk that he would relapse. Our Midlands correspondent Becky Cottrell has this report.
Roaming the streets in the early hours, armed with a knife, Valdo Calocane stabbed 3 strangers to death. He said voices in his head told him to do it. His victims were Ian Coates, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar. Their families have been demanding answers. Now a review by health inspectors has found there were serious errors in Calocane's care.
There was an issue around poor care planning and engagement. Valdo Calocane's family contacted the trust to raise concerns on a number of occasions, but the information they provided was not consistently acted on.
Some of these failings had already been laid bare by Calocane's brother in a letter to the victims' families. We can exclusively reveal what it said. We have seen firsthand just how broken the mental health care system is and can say without hesitation that this tragedy was completely avoidable if the system worked properly. My mother regularly expressed concerns to the relevant services about Valdo's mental deterioration, but these were constantly played down because he looked okay. Of course, we knew this not to be true, as he would constantly speak of his paranoid delusions to us. Ian Coates was a grandfather and much-loved school caretaker.
How did it make you feel reading that letter?
Angry. Basically washing his hands of responsibility. Him and his mother, they did what they could, but it was all down to the NHS. It was down to the mental health for not doing what they needed to do. But they knew he was unwell and they didn't do enough to help him.
The Chief Executive of Nottinghamshire Healthcare says he has committed to do everything within his power to prevent such a tragedy reoccurring. But it should never have happened in the first place. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the parents of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Dr Sandra Kumar and Dr Shade O'Malley, and asked for their reaction to the Care Quality Commission report, which was released earlier this morning.
First and foremost, I've got to say, if I was Lord Justice Turner today, who conducted our hearing, because of course we were denied a trial, the whole idea of drug-resistant schizophrenia was bandied about, and much was done about it, and that actually directed the course of our trial. The CQC confirmed emphatically that there was no such thing. There was no such thing as drug-resistant schizophrenia. The point was that the patient resisted taking his medication, and his condition waxed and waned. When someone does that, they're fully culpable. The example that I have made is if that someone doesn't take their blood pressure medication, they'll expect a heart attack. They expect things to happen. In the same way, Calocane was not drug resistant. He simply did not take his drugs. The risk assessments in his case were really poor by treating consultants, and he was sectioned 4 times. There were 4 opportunities to change his medication, change it to depot medication, which is injectable, which means that the patient complies. There were no community treatment orders put in place so that he would take his medication in the community. We had a simple case of a culpable person who just did not take his medication. All of this is devastating to read. It was so basic. The errors were not technical. They were basic errors and repeated 4 times over. There were so many chances to change the course of Calocane, but none of those opportunities were taken by any of the doctors. And lastly, the doctor who actually discharged him. That was the most irresponsible thing to do, knowing that a doctor initially, the one thing we did not know is that a doctor had put in the notes that he had the potential to murder someone. Even meeting the trust, Ifti Majid, who's the chief executive, did not discuss that with us. They weren't transparent and actually they did not tell us that this person had the potential for murder. Even now, things are being kept from us.
The CPC report clearly also says that basically there was no doubt that Valdo Calocane was going to relapse given his non-compliance with his medication and lack of engagement. And ultimately, statistics show that if there's a decent or at least even a basic standard of delivery of care, homicide does not occur.
The hope with reports like these, as they bring about change, that they bring about improvement, that things through such terrible circumstances do eventually get better. How hopeful are you that change will be brought about?
Well, Gareth, Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health, has promised us that he's going to slow down the modifications to the Mental Health Act. He has promised that we will be able to work with people who are working with the law. A change is needed. We need to step back a little bit and we need to see what is safe for the public. We have lost the absolute love of our life, our lovely, beautiful and brave daughter, Gracie. And at the end of the day, what we want to see is that the public are safe. I think the nation, as you know now, are crying out for safety from these crimes. You reported just before our item a stabbing. I really wonder if that was also related to mental health. At the end of the day, we want to get the Mental Health Act right. It's not about depriving people of their liberty. It's about just getting it right. It's about holding clinicians responsible who put people like that out on our streets. Any psychiatrist who puts out a dangerous person on our streets has to be held responsible for putting that patient out if he has not done a comprehensive risk assessment, which was another flaw that the CQC actually brought out in our case, that risk assessments were not done correctly, were not done fully. And these must be done under the law when the Mental Health Act is fully modified and completed. And we really hope to be working collaboratively with Wes Streeting, who certainly has the will and the intention to get this right.
You mentioned there the Health Secretary. You've learned that a public inquiry will be forthcoming. What more insight have you been given with regards to that?
Well, at the moment, we would like the terms of reference to cover a wide spectrum of all of the failings, because there were so many failings. There were failings not just by the Mental Health Trust. There were failings by Nottinghamshire Police. There were immense failings by Leicestershire Police. There were failings within the council. There were failings by so many organisations and then individuals. All of this needs to be brought together under a terms of reference that covers a public inquiry so that things get better for everyone, every victim today in England who has suffered the way we have. We want justice for them. We want the law changed for them. We fight in their name. We really want to change things for the better so that no other family ever fears for their child getting on a school bus, going to school, going to college, and being away from their family.
The family there of Grace Amali Kumar speaking. Ashish Joshi, our health correspondent here. Obviously really powerful testimony from her parents. Considering, though, the way the system works, both the NHS and the government, to what degree do you think they will achieve their objectives?
It's going to take a long time. It won't be immediate. The NHS's mental health system is broken. It's not fit for service. For years, we, as well as other media, have been documenting the failures in the NHS mental health system. There are just too many patients who need urgent care, not enough staff, poor training, not enough resources. There isn't space in the system to hold people. There aren't enough beds. And all of this will be highlighted in what will be inevitably yet another report. The family, listening to Dr. Kumar there, the family are convinced Wes Streeting will bring about change. Wes Streeting is a powerful advocate for change in the mental health system, but it's going to take a great deal of time because this is a system which needs an overhaul, root and branch from top to bottom. Immediately, the NHS must put into place steps to protect the public from potentially violent people who suffer from episodes of paranoid schizophrenia, as in this case, and also to treat patients who are entering the mental health system. Clearly, there were so many red flags in this particular case. 2 years in and out of the mental health care system, warnings administered, yet he wasn't engaging with the treatment and not taking his medication, doctors expressing concerns about potential to commit violence against anyone. Those should have been enough warnings to make sure that the mental health services, the healthcare trust, Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust, acted on those, but they didn't. And the reason why the family want to see a public inquiry is they want to see people held accountable. They want to get to the heart of actually what happened. It's really difficult, Gareth. When you're dealing with an institution like the NHS, it can seem like a faceless institution, so many layers to get through. But what they want to do is to get to the heart of the decision-making process that allowed a potentially violent mental health patient to kill their daughter.
Ashish, really appreciate it. Ashish Joshi there for us. Let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. A man has been charged with attempted murder and possession of a bladed article following the stabbing of an 11-year-old girl in London's Leicester Square. Ion Pintaru will appear in court later this morning. He was initially believed that the girl's mother was also hurt, but blood from her daughter's injuries had been mistaken for her mother's own. UK wage growth slowed to the lowest rate in almost 2 years, while the UK unemployment rate unexpectedly declined. That's according to the Office of National Statistics. Annual earnings growth, excluding bonuses, slowed to 5.4%. That's down from 5.8%. That was in line with expectations. The figures are closely watched by the Bank of England, that will be welcoming easing wage pressures as it decides whether to cut interest rates again this year. Health officials are calling on pregnant women to accept a new NHS vaccine to lower the chances of children contracting respiratory viruses. The UK Health Security Agency say around 90% of children are affected in the first 2 years of their lives. Scientists say there could be water below the surface on Mars, enough to have once covered the planet. Using data from NASA's InSight lander, scientists say the volume of water could have filled ancient Martian oceans. But not easy to access. It's 20 kilometres below the planet's surface. Sticking with celestial elements, many of us had our eyes peeled for the Perseid meteor shower last night, but some were lucky enough to also spot this. It's Yorkshire's sky, where vibrant purple and green northern lights dazzled whilst the meteor shower also rained down at the same time. A major forest fire in Greece has left one person dead and forced people to evacuate from the northern suburbs of Athens. Our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, joins us now. Siobhan, you're in one of the areas that's been badly affected.
Yes, I'm in Daly. I'm about 25 minutes drive from the centre of Athens, and this is a car depot where the fire came through yesterday. You can see the burnt out remains of vans here. You can also see in front, this was wood that was being stored, wood and coal, it looks like, charcoal, and it's still burning. You can see the hot embers in there. And you can see here that the fire brigade are still here because of that hot spot there, but also in the back keeps popping up. And so that's what they really want to avoid. Today's another very hot day, 38, 39 degrees. So they don't want these hotspots to reignite and then put more properties at risk. More burnt out cars there, burnt out wood as well. And as we go up and down this hill, we keep finding houses which have been totally destroyed. We were about 5 minutes down the road earlier and we met a 70-year-old who was in his house. The fire came down the hill. The fire brigade said, "You've got to get out." He managed to grab his dog, run for it. What he's returned to is basically a twisted, charred lump of metal. There is no home for him to go back to. And these fires that affected this area started on Sunday, were whipped up by gale force winds which continued to feed the flames. And despite hundreds of firefighters trying to tackle this with the support of volunteers and the military, they couldn't get it fully under control. It's come down into different areas, creeping towards Athens, going through some of the suburbs. Now, the good news overnight was the wind did drop. It is picking up a little bit, but it has helped them to split that fire front. So now it's not just one big front. There are pockets that they're continuing to fight. But we are expecting very, very hot weather here until Thursday. So the danger, the threat is far from over.
Siobhan Robbins, thank you. Police forces are hoping a new training programme can help officers use force safely and in turn cut the number of violent incidents. Our very own Rachel Venables was invited along to join the police on the course. Her report, though, does contain distressing images.
This gentleman has been arrested for a free.
It only takes a split second for their job to turn physical. This is a training exercise developed for police in England and Wales after concerns about attacks on officers and the number of people who've been hurt, even killed in custody. It's been developed by the College of Policing as an annual 2-day refresher course for serving officers. They practice with restraints and discuss the warning signs of asphyxiation.
It depends on the individual, the size of them, if they're under the influence of drugs or any sort of mental health issues. So then you've got to tailor your tactics, how you're going to deal with that individual in the best way possible to make them feel safe and your colleagues feel safe.
The college says a pilot scheme in Avon and Somerset produced significant results. They estimate the training led to 1,200 fewer use of force incidents over 12 months. Before it, they say an average officer used force in the job 6 times a year. That has now dropped to an average of 5 times. With smartphones constantly recording their interactions, the police are increasingly under pressure and criticism for their use of force. And this incident at Manchester Airport sparked huge protests a few weeks ago. The chair of the College of Policing says bosses need to be more proactive in releasing body cam footage after controversial arrests or viral incidents.
Some of the circumstances that amount to that is where there's a huge public and press interest, particularly where the release of the body-worn footage may actually help prevent serious violence or serious disorder.
This summer's riots have highlighted more than ever the threats police face from members of the public, the very people they've sworn to protect.
Get off me!
It's hoped this new training will make that difficult job a little easier. Rachel Venables, Sky News in Hendon.
A new report released today says that doctors had warned that the Nottingham attacker Valdo Calocane could have killed someone 3 years before he went on a rampage last June. Well, let's speak to Radd Seiger, spokesperson for the family of Barnaby Webber, who was killed in that attack. Radd, thank you so much for your time and sharing it with us. Lots of focus on 2 elements today. Firstly, the CQC and also the BBC's Panorama documentary. Just with reference to yesterday evening's documentary, did you see it and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I watched it for the families, and we were just hit with it, Gareth. and we're just trying to take stock. Congratulations to Panorama for getting the scoop, but we're very disappointed at the insensitive timing of it and for not including the victims. And we should all be thinking about the victims and their families. So, look, there was new stuff that came out last night that we need to process, but, understandably, Gareth, the family are fuming and their blood is boiling this morning.
You talk about having to process new information. Obviously, lots included in the CQC report that's been published today. What are your thoughts with regards to what you've been reading throughout the course of the morning?
Well, look, we've obviously known about the contents of the report for a little while now. I don't think you need to be a psychiatrist or a lawyer to understand that there were multiple failings at every level in Valdo Calocane's care, and we've known that for a little while now. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and what I've absolutely promised the families is that we will drive this to a point where they get the accountability and justice that they're entitled to. But as importantly, and just to add to Ashish's points a few moments ago, Gareth, it's as important for these families to leave a legacy for their loved ones and to hopefully ensure that what's happened to them never happens to another family again. There's absolutely no doubt that the NHS is broken. We know the issues, Gareth. It's under-resourced. Demand far outstrips supply. And what you then have is too few people doing far too much work, making mistakes, pushing people out the door back into the community because there aren't enough beds in the acute setting. And before you know it, we have clearly dangerous people wandering our streets and totally innocent people being destroyed.
You can hear, and I fully appreciate the sense of frustration, the emotion in your voice and in your words with regards to the families of those affected themselves. How are Barnaby's parents and family?
They are, they're destroyed, Gareth. There is no rationalizing this. There's no processing this. I'm worried about them all. Where they're getting as much therapy as they can, but how do you ever recover from this disaster? They're being incredibly brave and coming out and fighting not only for their loved ones but for the rest of us and trying to make society a safer place. And they should be commended. But my heart bleeds for them, Gareth. You can tell I'm emotional this morning, and I'll do everything I can to support them through this.
What are the next stages for you? The reports this morning that the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has indicated that a public inquiry will be forthcoming. What are the next steps?
So it's important that we take stock. We've hired the best lawyers in the country, and we're going to drive this, Gareth, towards a post office style public inquiry, a judge-led statutory inquiry. At the moment, everybody's marking their own homework. The NHS is marking its own homework. The police are marking their own homework. We have to get it to an inquiry and let a judge pour everything. And the way to do that is very patiently and slowly gather all the evidence, gather all the documentation. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg. Panorama had a portion of Valdo Calocane's medical records last night, but not the entirety of them. So what you'll see over the coming weeks and months, and we must commend the new government for stepping up and agreeing to an inquiry, is working with them to build that up so that when it's held, it's the full process that these families want to see, where we will let a judge go through it with lawyers, and then we'll see where we get to. But Gareth, as Ashish just said, things need to change, and the sooner the better.
The sooner the better, but as you'll be well aware, these types of situations generally do take time. They also take money. We heard in lots in the run-up to the election that there wasn't a magic money tree. With that in mind, how fearful or otherwise are you for the state of play?
It's desperately worrying, Gareth. I don't have the solutions myself. This has been going on for decades. There have been a number of inquiries over the years. As a society, we need to face up to the fact that the NHS in large part is not serving us. We are demanding far too much from it. We don't pay the people enough. The recruitment and retention is appalling. So I'm very worried. I don't know where this is going to get to, but let's see if we can use Nottingham as the opportunity to say, as a society, not just blame governments, but as a society, when you want the NHS to get you out of trouble or to protect the public, we're going to need to, have a huge rethink. And as you say, is it money? I don't know. There are people better placed than me to say what needs to be done. All we can do is pour over the disaster that happened in Nottingham and see what lessons need to be learned, leave it to a judge to make recommendations. And then we can all, as a society, with the government, say, we need to invest more. Or the safeguards are there, Gareth. As Ashish just said, we know the safeguards are there. The policies are already there. They're just not being implemented because there are not enough people on the wards, not enough staff in the community looking after these people. And I'm afraid I was shocked when I saw Nottingham, but not surprised. I'm shocked by the findings of the CQC, but not surprised. I'm supporting many other families in these circumstances. And on we go, Gareth, but it has to change.
Certainly. Radd Seiger, really appreciate you sharing your time with us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth.
Plenty more insight into that story and analysis on the Sky News website and app. In the meantime, let's bring you up to speed with the day's weather. Well, yesterday brought the year's highest temperatures so far. The next few days, cooler spells of rain following by some more showery conditions, though. It's quite muggy now. Rain over the east coast of Ireland and western UK, but it's mostly fine elsewhere. Northern and western Britain will see rain moving in this morning with a scattering of showers following to western Scotland, but southeast and central England will be dry and sunny. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, tensions rising in the Middle East over fears Iran will attack Israel. Can world leaders prevent a regional war? We'll speak to the former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia for analysis. And after Team GB's triumphant return, athletes visiting a centre in London, inspiring the next generation of sporting stars.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life. Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
You're watching Sky News. Gareth Barlow with you on a Tuesday morning. Let's remind you of our top stories today. The families of the victims of the Nottingham attacks have called for a public inquiry after a new report revealed doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill 3 years before he stabbed 3 people to death last summer. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned but then discharged by mental health workers. The parents of one of his victims, Grace Kumar, told this programme basic errors have been made and they want a public inquiry to examine the failings of all those involved, including the police. Ukrainian commanders claim they now hold 1,000 kilometres of territory inside Russia following the continued incursion into border regions. But Russia has warned President Zelensky is taking, I quote, insane steps that risk an escalation of the war far beyond Ukraine. Hundreds of firefighters are still battling major wildfires near Athens. The outbreak started on Sunday near Lake Marathon, about 20 miles north of the Greek capital, before reaching the city's suburbs. Much anticipated interview between Donald Trump and Elon Musk was marred by technical glitches, which the tech billionaire blamed on a cyber attack. The former president promised the largest deportation in US history during the broadcast on X. Well, let's get more on the diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East. Iran's foreign ministry this morning has accused the UK, France and Germany of indifference to what it said were Israeli war crimes in Gaza and the violation of its own sovereignty when a Hamas leader was assassinated by Israel in Tehran. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, spoke directly with the Iranian president, urging them not to strike back against Israel. Well, let's bring in Sir William Patey, former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Sir William, thank you for your time this morning. Just thinking about the fact that Sir Keir has spoken to the Iranian president, but today, this morning, the Iranian Foreign Ministry reacting to a kind of joint communique from the UK, France and Germany saying, effectively, impudent requests will probably be ignored.
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of influence on Iran. It's important to make connection with them and try to explain the consequences of a wider war in the Middle East. They'll be well aware of that. They say themselves they want to avoid it. But the attack on Ismail Haniyeh during the presidential inauguration in a IRGC guest house not only was an offence to their dignity. It was an offence to their dignity, and they have made it clear that they want to retaliate. The question is when will they do it? The Americans and the Egyptians and the Qataris are trying to resume ceasefire talks in Gaza, and these are all interrelated. It could be, I know the Israelis are briefing that they're expecting an attack this week. It could be that the Iranians will wait to see if those talks take place, and they would probably expect them to fail if previous rounds are anything to go by. Neither Hamas nor the current Israeli government seem very intent on achieving ceasefire talks. So they may wait for the failure of the ceasefire talks as a final signal that they would retaliate. But all the signs are that we can expect something.
Do you think that to some degree the passage of time is being used by the Iranians as a weapon itself? It was 13 days back in April between the strike and the retaliation, then 300 missiles, drones, other projectiles being fired over. Do you think that Iran is, in some respects, like you say, potentially waiting to see the outcome of those talks, but also just ratcheting up the tension by many respects doing nothing?
Well, the pressure is on Israel. Israel expecting an attack. All their citizens are braced for it. That in itself creates unease and tension. So that would, from a perverse point of view, that would please the Iranians. But they won't want to allow the attack on Ismail Haniyeh to go unanswered, and the same for Hezbollah, the Fuad Shukr killing in downtown Beirut. They won't want that to go unanswered. That's been the way of this conflict, that each side has responded to some outrage with one of their own. The question this time is it a larger attack than the Iranians launched the last time there was a retaliation for an Israeli attack with over 300 rockets, which was well signaled and gave the Israelis and Americans and others time to prepare and to essentially render the attack ineffective. And the Iranians claimed that that was part of their self-restraint. So the key this time will be to see if the Iranians are similarly self-restrained or seek to inflict much more damage on Israel, which in itself would then lead to an escalation.
You mentioned in your first answer it was good that the UK was opening and keeping open channels of communications, but the reality is that Downing Street doesn't really have much influence, if at all, over the Iranian authorities. With all of what you've just said considered, the fact that escalation at some point will happen and a retaliation to some point will happen, it's the degree to which both take place is the question mark. What are the next steps for Downing Street in real terms, and what can they realistically look to achieve?
Well, I think what they're doing is absolutely correct, working with friends and allies, the Germans, the French, Italians, other Europeans and the Americans, sending signals to the Iranians. The one glimmer of hope, although I'm pessimistic, the one glimmer of hope is that the new Iranian president, Pezeshkian, is known to be a more moderate than his predecessor, has indicated a willingness to reopen the nuclear talks. They want to get out from sanctions. So they've been sending signals that they're open to a dialogue. I think the fact that they've taken the call from the Prime Minister is indicative of a dialogue. The only real leverage the international community have over the Iranians at the moment is they would get the blame for scuppering the ceasefire talks that the Americans have proposed that should start on Thursday, with the Qataris and the Egyptians acting as intermediaries. Just a glimmer of hope that the Iranians don't want to be seen to be the ones who scupper those talks. So that may allow some delay. The longer we get away from the events of 31st of July when Hania was killed, may mean that the response may be less brutal, less severe than might otherwise have been the case.
Sir William Patey, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we heard there the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, warning Tehran not to attack Israel. That direct call with the Iranian president. Well, Darren's here for more on that and also what we've just been hearing. Your thoughts?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it, about why we've not had a response yet. And William there was talking about his thought that they don't want to be seen to scupper these potential peace talks that the Americans are really leaning into. I think there's another view, inside the Foreign Office here, and I'm not saying which one is right, which is essentially, Gareth, that actually this could be quite a sophisticated response for Iran. So they are taking their time to plan this properly, whether it comes directly from Iran, whether it comes from proxies in the region. But as you said, the diplomatic efforts are continuing, and we saw the Prime Minister speak to the Iranian president yesterday evening, conversation for 35 minutes. Britain still has diplomatic ties with Iran, unlike the United States. We've still got an embassy there. And the message very much from Keir Starmer was de-escalation, if you like. Let me just read a little bit of the readout from last night, where the Prime Minister said he was deeply concerned by the situation in the region and called on all parties to de-escalate and to avoid further regional confrontation. There was a serious risk of miscalculation, and now is the time for calm and careful consideration. I think a couple of things. First of all, as you rightly pointed out, will the Iranians actually listen to this message? How much influence does Britain have? It's a very small cog in what is a very, very complex situation. Though we did see that joint statement yesterday that Iran has just reacted to from Germany, France and the UK. So there is a concerted effort across Europe to try and de-escalate things. But there is very much Plan B in operation, if you like. We know that up to 1,000 British military personnel are kind of primed, if you like, to try and evacuate British nationals, if necessary, from Lebanon, from Israel, if needed, if things do escalate. And also, when you look at what European airlines are doing, for example, they're now effectively avoiding the region altogether. So, things are very, very difficult, very complex. There are plans in place, but at the moment, Downing Street are insistent that they are going to follow this diplomatic route and try and de-escalate the situation. Will it make any difference? I'm not entirely sure it is, but as Alistair Burt said earlier on, it's better that conversations are taking place.
Indeed. Darren, thank you for the moment. Well, let's turn our attention to Ukraine now. Its army claims its forces control 1,000 square kilometres of Russian territory. That's after the launch of a surprise incursion last week. It's prompted Russia to evacuate thousands of people from another city near the border. Well, Deborah is in Lviv for us. That's in western Ukraine. And she says they're clearly intending to keep the land they've taken in Russia.
I imagine that there was probably quite a bit of surprise for the Ukrainians that they've been able to push so far so quickly. Of course, they would have had intelligence. They could see the lack of Russian defences along that border region, but they would have anticipated a much stronger Russian response much faster, but that didn't happen. I was speaking to a source yesterday who gave a sense of the aims of this mission. One of them, this source said, was to create basically a buffer zone, a grey zone, not inside Ukrainian territory, but inside Russian territory, to help better protect the communities, the people who live in Sumy region, for example, and Kharkiv region, and have been under heavy bombardment from Russian forces on the other side of the border. Another aim is to have leverage, greater leverage over Vladimir Putin, to hold some territory that could maybe then be negotiated for Russian-held territory in Ukraine. There's clearly, and this is something that Volodymyr Zelensky said yesterday, there's clearly a desire to increase what he calls the exchange fund of prisoners, detainees, Ukrainian soldiers and others held in Russia, being swapped for the Russian soldiers that it seems Ukraine has managed to capture so far in this offensive. And then another goal is really to show to the Russian people that the war is much closer than they think. They've had 2.5 years of Russia's full-scale invasion, largely contained within Ukraine. Yes, the Ukrainians have increasingly been launching drone and missile strikes, including deep into Russia, but this is the first time that they have tried a concerted land offensive, and they're not just going in and coming out, they're going in, they're taking land, and they clearly plan to stay there if they can.
Deborah Haynes, who's in Lviv for us. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning. We're bringing you all the day's top stories, including police officers learning new skills to reduce the use of force in arrest situations.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world: Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
just gone 8:45 on a Tuesday morning. You're watching Sky News. Let's turn our attention now to the police, because images of a police officer kicking a man in the head at Manchester Airport have undermined public confidence in the police and raised questions about how they are trained. Well, Sky News has been given access to a new training programme which is designed to help officers calm difficult situations and use force safely when it's really necessary. Well, to discuss this, joined this morning by David Spencer, Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange, former Detective and Chief Inspector at the Met Police as well. Thank you so much for your time. Your thoughts on this new proposal and what it might achieve, first of all?
Policing's a pretty tough job. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And what's difficult is getting policing training right, because in the classroom, it can never really compare what it's like on the street. So the closest that's possible is this, what's called scenario-based training. And this training that the College of Policing have rolled out is probably as good as it's going to get in the sort of false situation of a classroom. So it is a step forward. A step forward, but is it not a step that should have been taken some time ago? Yeah, and there's no doubt that that's true, that it should have been. But, you know, this is all about progress, and I think it's positive that the College of Policing have done this. And you know, a lot of people are quite critical of the College of Policing and have been in the past. I think under their new, or certainly current leadership, this is the sort of step which is really positive and should be welcomed. You were at the Metropolitan Police previously. Do you think, and if so, to what degree, we are seeing a change in the situations that officers are responding to? Are we seeing more violent situations? Are we seeing them having to use force more than perhaps was used in the past? Well, we're certainly seeing them more. So it's very, very good. When I started in policing 20 years ago, there were no smartphones, no video cameras. That sort of thing was very, very unusual. Now, every single incident that a police officer goes to pretty much will be filmed, put on social media, and obviously that means the world gets to see it. So we're certainly seeing these things more often. Whether they're happening more often, I think, is another question. With all the training in the world, you made that reference to real-world situations and classroom situations, all the training in the world, to what degree does that stick with the officer in an instance like, for example, Manchester? There's no rule books, there's nobody going to say time out at the end of it. There's no knowledge of what's coming up next. You're not being told what the scenario is. In those moments, how much can officers rely on training, and how much do we have to rely on them being clear-headed, decent human beings who can act in the right way? Well, of course, the important thing is that there are rule books and there are huge amounts of law, legislation and rules that go along with the use of force. I think that's really important. But the reality is that real-life, on-the-street policing is always going to be different from the classroom. And that's why it's so important that we get recruitment right, we get vetting right, and that's why this sort of change is necessary all the time. I think my biggest concern is that there are, although this training's been rolled out to most police forces, there are still a couple that haven't done that yet, and those chief constables really need to look closely at that, because they are putting their own officers and the public at more risk if they don't catch up with this. I'm sure many people will be listening to this conversation thinking about the riots that we've seen in recent days and over the past week or so. And statistics of officers with lacerations, bruises, broken bones, the amount of force often being used against officers in situations like that, they're somewhat rarer. Some people would argue, well, hang on a second, actually, an officer has every right to deploy force. Well, maybe they should be, in some instances, more forceful. Well, they do have the right, and in fact, at times, are obligated to use force. But they have to use force which is reasonable and necessary in the circumstances. And that depends what the officer is facing at the time. So if, as we've seen on our screens over the last couple of weeks, if they're facing a very violent disorder, then absolutely officers should be using force. If officers are dealing with a different situation, then actually being able to de-escalate is the way it's described, but communicate better with a member of the public so they don't need to use force. That's a good thing. And do you think, on the whole, that compared to other countries, the UK has got it about right? Obviously, lots of talk in the United States, for example, about the number of police shootings. Other countries, their police officers are viewed in particularly detrimental ways. Do you think the UK is roughly in the right place? There's always things that can be done better. There's always ways that policing can improve. My own view, British policing is amongst the best in the world. And it's as simple as that. David Spencer, Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange. Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Time for a bit of sporting action now. Team GB returned, of course, from Paris, but they're already making a difference at a youth club in London, looking to inspire the next generation of athletes and hopefully improve Shaman's basketball playing. She's in Paddington for us, joining some of the Team GB stars. How's it going?
Well, I'm still hopeless on the basketball front, but I've had an extraordinary morning. It's honestly been incredible watching lots of these young children being inspired by athletes, not just the children. We've had photographers and myself also attempting some of the games as well. But this week is all about giving back to communities, celebrating the success that GB has had in the Olympics, but also trying to pay that forward with the next generation. I'm currently joined by a former Olympic gold medalist, Dame Catherine Granger. First of all, how would you sum up today's events and what's been going on here this morning?
I've probably been up since about 4:30 this morning. I still feel I'm smiling like a fool because it is so joyous to see. This youth club opened about 6 o'clock this morning and it has been packed since that moment. The young people, basketball, doing boxing, playing tennis, they're just loving sport. And they've got these incredible 6 Olympians just off the train from Paris, wandering around them with their medals on, playing basketball, shooting hoops, and it's just this joy of high-performance sport matching the grassroots sport and seeing the celebration of that.
And we're here for athletes like yourself to inspire the children, but I'm guessing you've been somewhat inspired by them as well, right?
Oh, completely. I think any of us who have done sport at a very high level, you know, yes, there's a seriousness to it, there's a focus to it, it's about performance. There's ambition and there's all these wonderful moments, and we've seen it in Paris. It's been extraordinary for the whole team. And then you come back and there's a real joy and innocence to just throwing a football or throwing a basketball or hitting a tennis ball, and it's this wonderful reminder of, for this, you still have the joy and the inspiration at the very top level, but actually it ripples throughout the sporting. It's wonderful.
And you are a former Olympic gold medalist yourself, but now you are head of UK sport. Tell me a little bit about how you think that Team GB performed in the recent Paris Olympics.
It's been incredible. The success is genuinely something we are so proud of. Every single athlete that went has done something magical in their own right. We came back with 65 medals across 18 sports. So the breadth of sports is really important because we want to have, it's public money that gets invested, and we want to make sure that the public feel this connection to their national team. They want to see whether it's diving or swimming or archery or shooting or whatever it is, the public can relate in some way to these amazing athletes and their stories. And I think, you know, the scale of success, but it's not just the success in the numbers, which are easy to talk about. It's that every single athlete has this wonderful story to tell, and they're their own inspiration. So we're doing this amazing Changemakers programme week, where the athletes are going home to their clubs, their communities, their societies, where they learn to swim, and sharing their stories, and that's really powerful.
And before we finish, very quickly, I'm going to get you to attempt a shot if we can.
We're
going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it. Can we get a ball very quickly?
I mean,
we've got one here. Ooh! We've got a ball. The lure of live television. Right, me first.
We're very far away.
I've broken the light as well. Oh, so close. Go on.
I can't
I'll step out the way.
I don't know if I can do this. I was distracted.
Sabotage.
Keep practicing,
Sabotage,
right?
yeah.
All the time.
Well, as you can see, I don't know if Aaron, the camera operator, is going to forgive me for breaking his light, but we are having a phenomenal day here today. It's all about inspiring the next generation, giving back to communities, and it's a reminder for these athletes about where it all began.
Shaman, thank you so much, and our best wishes to the Sky News tech team as well. I think Shaman, a basket was just achieved behind you as well, so shout out to Catherine. Appreciate it. Lots going on. Lots going on in Paddington.
I want to see a slow-mo of that light, like a kind of post-match reaction of the light kind of falling down in front. The joys of live TV.
Question for you. What's your view on baby freezing?
Baby freezing?
Yeah, air flares.
Oh, I don't know. What's your
pretzels?
Pretzels?
Spins? You have a lot to learn about breakdancing.
A lot
to learn about breakdancing. They're some of the key moves of breakdancing, Dan McCaffrey. And you said you could be in the Olympics.
The work begins now.
Well, the work really does.
It really does begin.
I'm going to test you on some more of these.
I think no one wants to see me breakdancing, unless they want to be thoroughly amused.
I feel as though a shuffle is one of the steps of footwork.
I think I could shuffle quite well.
Shuffle or a three-step.
But I might be shuffling off this set in a second.
Only after you've told me about gay flamingos.
Yes, well, this is a story about some flamingos at a zoo in Devon who have managed to adopt a little baby chick. who's hatched. Look at this. Look how cute this is. It comes after a result of Love Lagoon, which is based on Love Island, in which these flamingo couples have got together, paired up over the summer. One of the chicks was abandoned, and a gay couple have just decided to take it on and raise the little chick as their own. Apparently, it's quite common, actually, in the flamingo world. This happens, in fact, it's quite common in the bird world. But look how cute that is, a new family in Devon.
When I get grief on social media of pictures of me and my husband and being told it's unnatural, I'm going to respond now with videos of the flamingos instead to make my point. Very cute.
This is, I mean, how can you dislike this? So, so cute.
It's very sweet indeed. You're watching Sky News. Plenty to come here on Breakfast. Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. On today's show, the family of one of the Nottingham attack victims tells this programme why they're demanding a public inquiry following a devastating report into the failings of the case of Valdo Calocane.
And in politics, a ring to the front line. We'll speak to the new director of a documentary about Ukraine's former world heavyweight champion, Mr. Klitschko.
Fascinating stuff to come. It's Tuesday, the 13th of August. Victims' families say the doctors and police who let Nottingham killer Valdo Calocane walk the streets have blood on their hands. The parents of victim Grace O'Malley Kumar told Sky News it's devastating more wasn't done to stop Calocane killing their daughter.
Simple case of a culpable person who just did not take his medication. All of this is devastating to read. It was so basic. The errors were not technical, they were basic.
No, I'm not going this out! I'm not going this out! No! Get off! Get off me now!
Also to come, we're with the police as they train to use force safely. A stunning sight at Stonehenge after the most spectacular meteor shower of the year. We'll speak to the photographer who captured this image.
And I'm here with some of Team GB's Olympic heroes back home and now inspiring the next generation of athletic stars.
Very good morning to you. A new report has revealed that doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill someone 3 years before he went on the rampage in Nottingham. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned, but then discharged by mental health workers before he stabbed 3 people to death last year. And the families of his victims say the clinicians involved in treating him have blood on their hands. Well, the report from the Care Quality Commission revealed a series of blunders while Valdo Calocane was a patient of Nottingham Healthcare. There was an inconsistent approach to assessing the risk that he posed to himself and others. Poor planning and engagement with his family meant warnings weren't acted on. And the decision to discharge him back into the community did not adequately consider the risk that he would relapse. Our Midlands correspondent, Becky Cottrell, has this report.
Roaming the streets in the early hours, armed with a knife, Valdo Calocane stabbed 3 strangers to death. He said voices in his head told him to do it. His victims were Ian Coates, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar. Their families have been demanding answers. Now a review by health inspectors has found there were serious errors in Calocane's care.
There was an issue around poor care planning and engagement. Valdo Calocane's family contacted the trust to raise concerns on a number of occasions, but the information they provided was not consistently acted on.
Some of these failings had already been laid bare by Calocane's brother in a letter to the victims' families. We can exclusively reveal what it said. We have seen firsthand just how broken the mental health care system is and can say without hesitation that this tragedy was completely avoidable if the system worked properly. My mother regularly expressed concerns to the relevant services about Valdo's mental deterioration, but these were constantly played down because he looked okay. Of course, we knew this not to be true, as he would constantly speak of his paranoid delusions to us. Ian Coates was a grandfather and much-loved school caretaker.
How did it make you feel reading that letter?
Angry. Basically washing his hands of responsibility. Him and his mother, they did what they could, but it was all down to the NHS. It was down to the mental health for not doing what they needed to do. But they knew he was unwell and they didn't do enough to help him.
The Chief Executive of Nottinghamshire Healthcare says he has committed to do everything within his power to prevent such a tragedy reoccurring. But it should never have happened in the first place. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham.
A little earlier, I spoke to the parents of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Dr Sanjay Kumar and Dr Sinead O'Malley, and asked for their reaction to the Care Quality Commission report, which was released this morning.
First and foremost, I've got to say, if I was Lord Justice Turner today, who conducted our hearing, because of course we were denied a trial, the whole idea of drug-resistant schizophrenia was bandied about and much was done about it, and that actually directed the course of our trial. The CQC confirmed emphatically that there was no such thing. There was no such thing as drug-resistant schizophrenia. The point was that the patient resisted taking his medication and his condition waxed and waned. When someone does that, they're fully culpable. The example that I have made is if someone doesn't take their blood pressure medication, they'll expect a heart attack. They expect things to happen. In the same way, Calocane was not drug resistant. He simply did not take his drugs. The risk assessments in his case were really poor by treating consultants. And he was sectioned 4 times. There were 4 opportunities to change his medication, change it to depot medication, which is injectable, which means that the patient complies. There were no community treatment orders put in place so that he would take his medication in the community. We had a simple case of a culpable person who just did not take his medication. All of this is devastating to read. It was so basic. The errors were not technical. They were basic errors and repeated 4 times over. There were so many chances to change the course of Calocane, but none of those opportunities were taken by any of the doctors. And lastly, the doctor who actually discharged him. That was the most irresponsible thing to do, knowing that a doctor initially, the one thing we did not know is that a doctor had put in the notes that he had the potential to murder someone. Even meeting the trust, Ifti Majid, who's the chief executive, did not discuss that with us. They weren't transparent and actually they did not tell us that this person had the potential for murder. Even now, things are being kept from us.
The CPC report clearly also says that basically there was no doubt that Valdo Calocane was going to relapse given his non-compliance with his medication and lack of engagement. And ultimately, statistics show that if there's a decent or at least even a basic standard of delivery of care, homicide does not occur.
The hope with reports like these, as they bring about change, that they bring about improvement, that things through such terrible circumstances do eventually get better. How hopeful are you that change will be brought about?
Well, Gareth, Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health, has promised us that he's going to slow down the modifications to the Mental Health Act. He has promised that we will be able to work with people who are working with the law. A change is needed. We need to step back a little bit and we need to see what is safe for the public. We have lost the absolute love of our life, our lovely, beautiful and brave daughter, Gracie. And at the end of the day, what we want to see is that the public are safe. I think the nation, as you know now, are crying out for safety from these crimes. You reported just before our item a stabbing. I really wonder if that was also related to mental health. At the end of the day, we want to get the Mental Health Act right. It's not about depriving people of their liberty. It's about just getting it right. It's about holding clinicians responsible who put people like that out on our streets. Any psychiatrist who puts out a dangerous person on our streets has to be held responsible for putting that patient out if he has not done a comprehensive risk assessment, which was another flaw that the CQC actually brought out in our case, that risk assessments were not done correctly, were not done fully. And these must be done under the law when the Mental Health Act is fully modified and completed. And we really hope to be working collaboratively with Wes Streeting, who certainly has the will and the intention to get this right.
You mentioned there the Health Secretary. You've learned that a public inquiry will be forthcoming. What more insight have you been given with regards to that?
Well, at the moment, we would like the terms of reference to cover a wide spectrum of all of the failings, because there were so many failings. There were failings not just by the Mental Health Trust. There were failings by Nottinghamshire Police. There were immense failings by Leicestershire Police. There were failings within the council. There were failings by so many organisations and then individuals. All of this needs to be brought together under a terms of reference that covers a public inquiry so that things get better for everyone. Every victim today in England who has suffered the way we have, we want justice for them. We want the law changed for them. We fight in their name. We really want to change things for the better so that no other family ever fears for their child getting on a school bus, going to school, going to college, and being away from their family.
More on that story on the Sky News website and the Sky News app. Let's turn our attention now to Iran, because the Foreign Ministry this morning has accused the United Kingdom, France and Germany of indifference to what it said were Israeli war crimes in Gaza and the violation of its own sovereignty when a Hamas leader was assassinated by Israel in Tehran. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, spoke directly with the Iranian president, urging them not to strike back against Israel. While our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Haifa in northern Israel for us. Dominic, your thoughts this morning on the situation as it stands on a Tuesday. There's been talk for days now of retaliation, but yet, despite conversations between Downing Street and Tehran, the world still watches, still waits.
Yes, and we're effectively caught in this sort of contradictory moment in time where the region is kind of suspended between the prospects of both peace and war, because we have this concerted diplomatic push by America, Europe, Qatar and Egypt to try and convene ceasefire talks at the end of the month, either in Doha, the capital of Qatar, or Cairo, the Egyptian capital. And there is hope that that could lead to something. There's been some posturing from both sides ahead of that possible summit, but certainly there is momentum in that process, and there is an appetite, certainly Western diplomats and regional diplomats think, on both sides, to bring about a ceasefire that could extract the hostages from Gaza and see at least a prolonged period of an end in hostilities in Gaza. But at the same time, the region is bracing for a major escalation, because both Iran and Hezbollah are expected to retaliate, to exact revenge for the killing with Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah chief of staff in Beirut 2 weeks ago, and also a fortnight ago, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political branch of Hamas in Tehran. It's particularly that attack, I think, that Israeli observers of intelligence agencies here expect Iran to take revenge for, because it was embarrassing, very embarrassing for the Iranians that Israel was able to take out this leader in their own capital city in the aftermath of the funeral of the country's president. So ahead of that possible retaliation, we've seen another concerted diplomatic effort from Western countries. Keir Starmer on a phone to Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, last night, and a statement issued by Western countries on both sides, deeply concerned about the possibility of an escalation and by the possibility of what that retaliation could lead to. But Iran has been pretty dismissive, as you were saying there, of that diplomatic effort, saying the West is showing indifference, also accusing them of impudence, saying that it's a bit rich for the West to urge Iran to show restraint when it's their ally Israel who've killed more than 40,000 Palestinian civilians, many of them in Gaza. So no signs of restraint from Iran diplomatically. And in the coming days, it's certainly the assessment of Israeli intelligence agencies that's been reported by a number of well-sourced Israeli security correspondents. Their assessment is that Iran and Hezbollah will take some kind of retaliatory action, which obviously overshadows the prospects of peace in that other diplomatic process towards a ceasefire in Gaza.
Dominic Waghorn in Israel for us. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Darren McCaffrey. Dominic making the point there that the Iranians effectively commenting that it's a bit rich for Western countries, the United Kingdom, part of them, to make these comments. So Keir will surely say, well, hang on a second, I've been calling for a ceasefire for months, been calling for the release of hostages for months, and as a good international actor, as the UK likes to think it is, you've got to call on all sides, and that includes the Iranians.
Yeah, indeed, and that conversation last night he had with the Iranian president did call for de-escalation on all sides, and he talked about essentially the release of those hostages, but also calling for that immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid to Gaza. But the message very much to Iran, Gareth, if you like, was that there is a risk of miscalculation. He's asking for a period of time of calm and careful consideration, and also calling for all parties to de-escalate. You know, this is part of a concerted diplomatic effort. I'm not entirely sure how much Iran is going to listen to the UK or indeed to our European allies on all of this. And it comes, Gareth, of course, as the UK is making a plan just in case things do escalate, with up to 1,000 British military personnel on standby to help evacuate British nationals from Lebanon, from Israel, if we do see things escalate. And at the same time, European airlines now avoiding essentially large swathes of the Middle East as airspace, because there is concern that things could change quite quickly. But Keir Starmer determined, it seems at the moment, to keep diplomatic channels open. As I say, the big question is, will it make any difference?
Time will tell. All our correspondents on the ground will, of course, bring us up to speed on all of the developments as we get them. In the meantime, let's give you some of the day's other headlines now. A man's been charged with attempted murder and possession of a bladed article following the stabbing of an 11-year-old girl in London's Leicester Square. Ayan Puntaru will appear in court later this morning. It was initially believed the girl's mother was also hurt, but blood from her daughter's injuries had mistakenly been thought to have been the mother's too. UK wage growth slowed to the lowest rate in almost 2 years, while the UK unemployment rate unexpectedly declined. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. Annual earnings growth, excluding bonuses, slowed to 5.4%. That's down from 5.8%, in line, though, with expectations. The figures are closely watched by the Bank of England, that will welcome easing wage pressures as it decides whether or not to cut interest rates again later this year. Health officials are calling on pregnant women to accept a new NHS vaccine to lower the chances of children contracting respiratory viruses. The UK Health Security Agency says around 90% of children are affected in the first 2 years of their lives. Scientists say there could be water below the surface on Mars, enough to have once covered the planet. Using data from NASA's InSight lander, scientists say the volume of water that could have filled ancient oceans. But it's not easy to access. It's 20 kilometres below the planet's surface. Meanwhile, many of us will have had our eyes peeled, I'm sure, for the Perseid meteor showered last night. Well, some stargazers were lucky enough to get this as well. This is the night sky in Yorkshire, vibrant purples and greens as the Northern Lights dazzled at the same time that the meteor shower rained down upon the Earth. Police forces are hoping that a new training programme can help officers to use force safely and cut the number of violent incidents. Rachel Venables was invited along to join the police on the course. Her report does contain some distressing images.
This gentleman has been arrested for a fray.
It only takes a split second for their job to turn physical. This is a training exercise developed for police in England and Wales after concerns about attacks on officers and the number of people who've been hurt, even killed in custody. It's been developed by the College of Policing as an annual 2-day refresher course for serving officers. They practice with restraints and discuss the warning signs of asphyxiation.
It depends on the individual, the size of them, if they're under the influence of drugs or any sort of mental health issues. So then you've got to tailor your tactics, how you're going to deal with that individual in the best way possible to make them feel safe and your colleagues feel safe.
The college says a pilot scheme in Avon and Somerset produced significant results. They estimate the training led to 1,200 fewer use of force incidents over 12 months. Before it, they say an average officer used force in the job 6 times a year. That has now dropped to an average of 5 times. With smartphones constantly recording their interactions, the police are increasingly under pressure and criticism for their use of force. And this incident at Manchester Airport sparked huge protests a few weeks ago. The chair of the College of Policing says bosses need to be more proactive in releasing body cam footage after controversial arrests or viral incidents.
Some of the circumstances that amount to that is where there's a huge public and press interest, particularly where the release of the body-worn footage may actually help prevent serious violence or serious disorder.
This summer's riots have highlighted more than ever the threats police face from members of the public, the very people they've sworn to protect.
Get off me!
It's hoped this new training will make that difficult job a little easier. Rachel Venables, Sky News in Hendon.
I want to turn our attention now to Greece. A major forest fires left a person dead and forced people to be evacuated from the northern suburbs of Athens. On the ground for us is our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins. What's surrounding you at the moment, Siobhan?
Hello, I've just come round the corner about half an hour from the centre of Athens, just up the coast more, because it was further round there where lots of the bad fires started on Sunday. And you can see on the hill behind me the kind of blackened patches all over. And that just shows you what the fire brigade were dealing with when this was at its height. The flames were basically ripping across these areas, very hard to get to, being fuelled by gale force winds. And we're seeing helicopters going back and forth. They're basically the seers this side of me. So they're going to pick water out of the sea and then fly across. There's just one in the background there you might be able to see. Fly across the other side of the mountain and then drop the water, because some of these areas are so hard to get to. But we also saw in our previous reports houses which had been totally decimated on the outskirts of Athens, maybe just 25 minutes from the suburbs. We met from the centre, we met a 70-year-old man who said he was given just minutes to get out of his house. He grabbed his dog, everything else was gone. And the intensity of that fire is extreme. The metal in his house had been bent out of shape. Everything inside had burned. And today there has been a respite in a sense compared to the last 24 hours. The winds have dropped a bit. There are far fewer active fires. So at its height, they were dealing with one big fire front. Now it's pockets. But the problem is that this really extreme temperature, 38, 39 degrees, and very dry conditions in the lead up to this mean that until Thursday, they are in high alert in this area for continuing fires.
Siobhan, really appreciate the update. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, Professor Sir Andrew Pollard joins us to explain how a new vaccine could prevent 5,000 babies a year from having to receive hospital treatment. Plus, the stars aligned to take this perfect image of Stonehenge during last night's spectacular meteor shower. We'll speak to the man behind the picture.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
A vaccine that could protect babies from common lung disease is being rolled out for pregnant women from next month. Respiratory syncytial virus, which includes symptoms resembling a cold, accounts for around 20,000 hospitalisations in children under 1 year and is responsible for 20 to 30 infant deaths in the UK each year. The UK Health Agency modelling suggests that the jab could avoid 200 infants needing intensive care. Well, let's bring in Chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, Professor Sir Andrew Pollard. Sir Andrew, thank you for your time this morning. So just talk to us about this virus, if you will. What is it and what's the challenges posed by it?
Well, good morning. Yes, so this virus, respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV,
is a virus which affects almost every baby in the first 2 years of life. And as a paediatrician, over the last 35 years of my career, I've seen every winter an avalanche of babies coming into hospital, distressed parents, and some of those in intensive care, and very rarely some in this country also dying from the disease. And it's a huge burden on the NHS. It adds winter pressures to our system. And now we're in a position where we can prevent those admissions to hospital with a new vaccine, which is going to be launched this year. So it's a very exciting time for the health service, but even more importantly, for families in protecting babies from ending up in hospital with this disease.
Great news for families with young babies going forwards. It roll out around September time, I believe. But for families who have maybe experienced this already, I'm sure some will be asking, where was the vaccine when our kids were young? What's been the delay in its production?
Well, the development has actually been going on for the last 60 years with lots of efforts to try and work out how to make a vaccine which would protect against this virus. And really the breakthroughs only come over the last few years. And rollouts started just in the last 12 months in some countries. The countries in the Southern Hemisphere are actually vaccinating at the moment for their winter. And we're hoping to see a much bigger rollout across Northern Hemisphere countries this year. So it's really just first of all, a scientific challenge, but then the process of running the studies to show that the vaccine was effective, it could prevent this disease, and that it's safe. And that's really what's brought us to this moment today. But you're absolutely right. I wish we could have had this earlier in my career, having seen so many babies affected and in hospital over that period.
Considering the percentage of babies that have this, you referenced there, around 90%, what do you expect once the rollout kind of gets widespread? What do you expect those figures to fall to? What are the hopes here?
Well, there are about 20 to 30,000 babies admitted to hospital every year with the virus. And really, the vaccine is very highly effective. So it depends what the coverage is like. So if pregnant women take the vaccine, then we should be able to see very dramatic fall. And the modelling study, which takes a slightly pessimistic view of the potential coverage, suggests that about 5,000 of those admissions will be prevented. But if more people take the vaccine, then we have the potential to keep more babies out of hospital and healthy at that critical and vulnerable time of their lives.
Really appreciate you sharing your time with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be with you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show, we'll speak to the director behind a documentary lifting the lid on one of boxing's biggest stars. Plus, the stars aligned to take a perfect photo. This at Stonehenge during last night's spectacular meteor shower. You're watching Breakfast on Sky News. We have plenty on the Olympic stars coming back and inspiring the next generation here in London later in the programme. Before that, a reminder of our top stories this morning. The families of the victims of the Nottingham attacks have called for a public inquiry after a new report revealed doctors had warned Valdo Calocane could kill 3 years before he did stab 3 people to death last summer. The paranoid schizophrenic had been repeatedly sectioned but had been discharged by mental health workers. Ukrainian commanders claim they now hold 1,000 kilometres of territory inside Russia following the continued incursion into border regions. But Russia has warned President Zelensky is taking, I quote, insane steps that risk an escalation of the war far beyond Ukraine itself. Hundreds of firefighters are still battling major wildfires near Athens. The outbreak started on Sunday near Lake Marathon, about 20 miles north of the Greek capital, before reaching the city's suburbs. A much-anticipated interview between Donald Trump and Elon Musk was marred by technical glitches, which the tech billionaire blamed on a cyber attack. The former president promised the largest deportation in US history during the broadcast on X. A new documentary offers unprecedented access to one of boxing's biggest names. Klitschko, More Than a Fight, follows Vitaly Klitschko, charting his legendary sporting career and his heroic role as mayor of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Let's take a listen.
I am a soldier.
Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko are the kings of the heavyweight division.
You want to see a heavyweight destroyer?
The mayor of Kiev says things could become apocalyptic if Russia continues to strike its energy infrastructure.
We're fighting for our future.
We're joined now by the film's director, Kevin MacDonald. Kevin, we're just watching here. It's an extraordinary story of two halves, really.
It really is an extraordinary story. These are both brothers. Vladimir, the younger brother, and Vitaly, the older brother, became world heavyweight boxing champs. For about 10 years, they had pretty much all the belts between the two of them, but they never fought each other. That was part of the legend. Their mother wouldn't let them fight each other. Vitaly left boxing in 2011 and went into politics and has been for the last 10 years the mayor of Kiev. And of course, that's been a pretty heavy-duty post for the last 2 years. And so we follow him in the present day as he's dealing with all the day-to-day issues of being mayor in a city under constant bombardment. But also we tell the story of his boxing career and how he ended up where he is.
Give us some insights into what it's like to be that fly-on-the-wall, over-the-shoulder person as someone like Vitaly Klitschko goes about trying to effectively defend his homeland.
Well, you know, to begin with, it was quite hard because he is the kind of, you know, he's sporting superstar. He's used to dealing with the press, batting them away. So although he'd sort of agreed, oh, what, fly-on-the-wall film, you can come anywhere, actually, he was very reserved. But then there was this terrible tragedy that happened one day where a bomb shelter was left locked accidentally, and 2 people, a woman and a child, were trying to get in, and they died in a bombardment. And this so upset him that there was a total change in his character, actually, and we happened to be there at the time. And from that moment on, he really let us in. And we saw that, you know, he's divorced his wife, I think in part in consequence of the amount of time he's just spending at work. He's just at work all the time. He's living this monastic life in a tiny apartment, really giving everything he's got to the people in Ukraine. He's bringing the same kind of attitude he brought to the ring, which is a kind of, you know, there's no such thing as defeat attitude. He's bringing that to the war.
It's obviously an interesting thought to think as well that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedic actor who played a role of the president of Ukraine. You've then got a sporting superstar who's the mayor of the capital of the country. These are men thrust into roles, or certainly entered roles, that they never would have imagined became what they have become. From kind of your analysis of seeing him as a sporting superstar to who he is now, how much has him and his brother changed?
Well, I actually think that Vitaly, has not changed that much. He's a man of few words, but incredibly charming, twinkle in his eye, much smarter than people give him credit for. I think that's his main weapon. People tend to think, oh, he's a heavyweight boxer, he's been knocked around the head, he's going to be a bit dumb. But actually, he's incredibly smart. And one of the things in the film that I think people will find fascinating is the friction there is between him and the President Zelensky. And this relationship is not a good relationship. They're competitors. And it is interesting, they both come from these celebrity backgrounds. Somebody said to me, this is the sign of an immature democracy, that Ukraine's an immature democracy because it has celebrities as its politicians. I don't know if that's the case, but I would say that they've both Zelensky and Vitaly Klitschko have done an incredible job of moving from the kind of worlds of entertainment and sport into politics, and I think leave most politicians in the dust, to be honest, in terms of leadership skills.
It's, of course, not the only country to have celebrities as politicians, but we'll leave that there, just hanging in the breeze. What's it like for you as a director? Because making a documentary about events that have passed is one thing, but telling a story in real time, and a story that's not yet finished, how does that affect your work?
Well, there is always the challenge of figuring out what is the story. In the present day, the past story is kind of over. You know, they grew up in the Soviet Union, they went to Germany, became superstars, came back to Ukraine. But what's happening now, you know, nobody I've spoken to in Ukraine is yet willing to say, we're ready to sue for peace. We're ready to admit that we're not going to win this war. They all believe that they can still push the Russians out. And they have this burning sense of injustice, as I think anyone who goes there shares that sense of burning injustice at the wanton destruction that Putin has wreaked in the place. We leave the end of the film hanging. You know, there is no definitive way to go. It's just really that he's not going to give up. In the same way as he didn't give up in his fights in the ring, he's not going to give up in this, and he's going to take it as far as he possibly can.
And just finally, how do you, on a personal level, balance the humanity that you will witness through your own eyes, but then also the work you have to do as a director, almost being objective about your work? How does that marry on a subject as sensitive as this?
Well, it is very difficult in a couple of regards. In this film in particular, there's an unattractive quality to the conflict between Zelensky and Vitaly Klitschko. And I didn't really want to focus on that too much, but it kept coming up, So that becomes a major story in this, that political conflict. But also, I think that when you grow close to people on the ground, you know, my crew out there, or Vitaly and his brother, his family, his wonderful mother who appears in the film, you of course are biased. You know, I was already pro-Ukraine in the fight, and now I'm even more so. And in a way, that's the purpose of a film like this. I want people to watch this, and they might be boxing fans who don't really know much about the Ukraine war, don't know much about Ukrainian history, and they're going to be entertained by the boxing, revisit some of the great moments, but they're also going to really now understand where we are in the conflict, how we got there.
Fascinating stuff. Kevin MacDonald, director of the film, really appreciate it. Of course, we can't talk to you about it without telling you where you can watch it. You can watch the documentary Vitaly Klitschko on Sky Documentaries and also on Now this Thursday. Let's also bring you some important economic figures that are being released this morning. Developing situation there. UK wage growth slowed to the lowest rate in almost 2 years, while UK unemployment rates unexpectedly declined. That's according to the Office of National Statistics. Our business presenter Ian King joins us now. Ian, just walk us through what we've learned in the last few hours.
Well, Gareth, the figures are really consistent with an economy that's recovering, a labour market that's probably slightly cooling. Probably the headline is the fact that earnings growth, excluding bonuses, as you say, came in at 5.4%. So that was down from 5.8% last time. That's the 3 months to the end of June, including bonuses, down from 5.7% to 4.5%. One of the factors at play there was a big NHS pay rise that went through on the comparable figures, so that's why you see it coming off the boil. Vacancies, well, they fell for a 26th consecutive month to 884,000. But that is still higher than it was pre-pandemic. So, again, it points to a certain tightness in the labour market. And I think the other key thing is that inactivity, that's the number of people, the proportion of the workforce who are of working age but who aren't currently in work, well, that remains stubbornly high at 22.2%. In other words, getting on for 1 in 4 people of working age is not actually in work. Now, a lot of those are students or full-time carers looking after sick relatives, but it's still something that we know that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is very, very concerned about. In terms of the earnings growth itself, well, I think the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee will be rather uneasy at this, because it's still appreciably ahead of where they would want it to be right now. So that is something to keep an eye on. We've also, by the way, had some grocery inflation inflation data today. Now, obviously, we get the official inflation statistics tomorrow, and it's expected to show a rise from 2% to 2.3%. But interestingly, these figures come from Kantar World Panel, the data provider, and they reveal that grocery prices rose by some 1.8% in the 4 weeks to the end of August. That is after 17 months of falling grocery prices. So you are seeing an uptick in grocery prices. Now, I wouldn't want people to get too uneasy about this, because there are certain items in the grocery basket that are still falling in price. For example, toilet paper, dog food. These are areas where prices are still falling, and obviously it's an incredibly competitive grocery market right now. But there are areas where you are starting to see price increases, notably vitamins and minerals, and also confectionery, which has been driven by a big rise in wholesale cocoa prices. So a bit of a harbinger then that inflation may be starting to creep up in certain parts of the economy. And as I say, we will get this rise in the headline rate of inflation this time tomorrow.
Ian King in our newsroom, thank you so much. And as Ian said there, of course, latest figures come out tomorrow with regards to inflation. We'll have the full story first with regards to that here on Sky News. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, the stars aligned to take the perfect photo of Stonehenge during last night's spectacular meteor shower. We'll speak to the man behind the image.
Do you know what kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
South East and Central England look fine this morning, while Northern and Western Britain will see outbreaks of rain spreading from the west. Scattering of showers will follow to Western Scotland later. Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will be mainly dry with sunny spells after early rain. It won't be as hot, though. Still very warm in the southeast, however. Central England will turn wet later, while brighter skies will take over the north. Here's the pollen for you. So it's high from Portsmouth all the way up to Yorkshire and across the east coast, East Anglia, moderate across Wales, up into the far north of Scotland, low across Northern Ireland, the Highlands and the Islands.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
This conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
If you forgot your pajamas, Emirates has got you covered. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Now, if you were lucky enough to have clear skies last night, you were treated to a spectacular display from the Perseid meteor shower. Debris from the swift-tuttled comet led to 100 metres an hour lighting up the sky as it passed through the Earth. And it also led to incredible photo opportunities, including this one. Take a look at this from Stonehenge. Absolutely incredible. Well, the photographer behind it, Josh Jury, joins us now from the Mendip Hills. Josh, this is stunning. It's, no pun intended, out of this world. Just talk to us about this picture.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for having me on today. So this photograph was taken on Friday evening and it captures the Perseid meteor shower emanating above Stonehenge. So it's capturing the Milky Way running vertically down towards the monument. And, you know, it's a photograph I've always wanted, you know, in my mind for a long time. And it was only that on Saturday evening that I had an email from NASA. And first of all, thought, is this right? And it so turns out that, you know, I found out this particular photograph was recognised for NASA's astronomy picture of the day.
What was your reaction when you got that email? We can still see the smile on your face.
I didn't know whether to believe it. I thought, hang on a minute. And then I just saw it on nasa.gov's page. And I thought, wow. And literally, my phone hasn't stopped for 48 hours now. It's been insane.
Talk to me about how you create this, because most of us, as we went out, would struggle to form such an incredible picture.
So something I have to mention is with the Perseid meteor shower, you can see around 50 to 100 meteors every single hour if the conditions are right and you're looking in the right place. So this photograph is capturing individual images over a 3-hour period where I was able to capture 43 of these meteors. And so to capture this visualization, as you like, to appear raining down on Stonehenge, for those purposes alone, this image has to be a composite, although it was all taken from the same location, the same conditions in that imaging session, and this is what I carried during that 3-hour period.
How big is the file size then for something like this? A geeky question, I know.
Let's just say it's quite big and it's taking up lots of memory space on the good old hard drive. So, yeah, it's been fantastic. And, you know, just the recognition this image has got already, it's been phenomenal to share the story with so many other people.
So you've managed to combine one of man-made wonders of the world, I think it's fair to say, with regards to Stonehenge. You've managed to then combine that with one of the natural world's incredible wonders. Where do you go from this? Because you've set the bar pretty high.
Well, first of all, Stonehenge has been a part of my life for a very long time, and English Heritage have very kindly supported me over the years. So to capture this image of Stonehenge against something so ancient, I like to call them ancient fireworks because they are. You know, this debris from this meteor shower was created by a comet, otherwise known as Comet Swift-Tuttle. So to capture that connection through time, I thought was a very pertinent narrative for the piece. And so now with the recognition by NASA, it can lead to so many new avenues.
It's absolutely stunning. We really appreciate you sharing time for us as well. Josh, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Well, let's turn from shooting stars to sporting stars now, because Team GB returned, of course, from Paris, already making a difference to the next generation at a youth club in London, hoping to inspire them. Also amongst the action is Shaman Freeman-Powell, who had a smashing time in Paddington the last hour. Shaman, what's going to happen this time round?
I'm going to try and keep it straightforward this time around and just tell you a little bit about what's taking place here today at this youth club in Paddington. We have numerous Team GB athletes fresh from the Olympics, some of them inspiring the next generation to get involved in sport. It's a part of an initiative called the Change Makers Initiative, which is funded by the National Lottery. Obviously, that National Lottery helps to support athletes to get to the Olympics. Now it's helping to support those athletes to inspire the next generation. I'm joined with Lola Anderson now, the gold medal Olympian. First of all, how are you feeling, Lola? You only got home yesterday, didn't you?
I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, I think every single part of the games experience has been set up to make sure that we as athletes feel like we're on cloud nine. And then, yeah, like the medal is obviously a bonus on top of that, but we've been treated so well so far by everyone. It's pretty hard to feel anything but, like, special.
Can we have a look at your medal? Hold it up for us, please do. I mean, it is a thing of beauty, isn't it? You must be so extraordinarily proud. And I know that your dad, who you've spoken about, would also be very proud of you.
Yeah.
I know it's a story that you've shared previously, but please tell us about that little note that you wrote and the importance and significance of that.
Yeah, so I was watching the London 2012 Olympics. I had just started my sport, which is rowing, and I watched a women's pair absolutely smash it, win gold. And so I got my diary and I scribbled down, my name is Lola Anderson. When I'm older, I think it would be my biggest dream in life to go to the Olympics and, if possible, win gold for Team GB. Almost immediately, I was very, very embarrassed because I didn't really believe that it would be achievable. So I tried to hide it, throw it in the bin, but I was not very discreet, and my dad just pulled out my diary, saved it, stashed it, and I didn't know about it until he gave it back to me 7 years later, just before he passed. Yeah.
And I feel like that's very poignant because you had your father that was your #1 champion, supported you to believe in your dreams even when you didn't.
Yeah.
Why is that important for you to pass that on to children who may not have that in their own household?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have the rest of my family be like incredible supporters. And I just think realistically, like coming to events like this today, it's important to be able to connect with kids that might be at the start of their journey, or they might not have even really thought about sport yet. And it's just good to share that anything is achievable if you believe in yourself. And if you don't believe in yourself, then your friends, your family, anyone around you can be that boost. But today, I hope we can be that boost. You know, like the events like this are supported by like the National Lottery and us coming here today to sort of share experience. And I've just been embarrassed by every single 5-year-old here, not made one shot, and I'm learning.
We're all learning.
Yeah.
So you are an incredible inspiration for boys and girls that have been here today. So thank you very much, Lola. As I say, I think today has been a delightful day. It's been truly inspiring watching all these kids soaking up the energy and taking part in games alongside Olympic athletes.
Shimon Freeman-Powell in Paddington for us this morning. Thank you so much. Two really good things about the Paris Olympics. For the first time ever, gender parity with regards to the athletes, equal number of male and female.
Men and women, yeah.
And also Team GB, shout out to the mothers who were gone there as well. There was, when they were coming off the train yesterday, they were talking about the number of mothers who managed to obviously balance kind of incredible sporting success and then also kind of achieving their own kind of
It's amazing, though,
ambitions.
watching these athletes. And actually, I've just been reading the fact that actually lots of the athletes, when they come back from these Olympic Games, need help because they've been working so hard for this one goal for at least the last 4 years that actually, when it all goes away, when they've won the medal or not, they go, what am I meant to do now? So actually, apparently the authorities are stepping in to help them kind of get over the Olympic Games, if you like.
Well, if you need something to do this afternoon on a sunny day, pop to London Zoo. Banksy's been busy, yet again. We've seen plenty of his artwork over the course of this week. A gorilla, they're lifting up the curtain.
The seal coming out.
There's some eyes, parrots.
How does he do this? As in, like, overnight? It's quite impressive, isn't it?
It is impressive. I just hope, unlike some of the other ones we've seen so far this week, that one gets to stay there for more than 2.5 hours. Or
yeah, I think someone stealing a shutter is going to be quite difficult, but...
Darren, never say never.
No, indeed.
But no, fingers crossed.
And when does it stop? I mean, he's done...
A big question. Also, what does it mean?
Indeed.
Big questions you can answer. You watch the sky.